Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, May 23rd, 2019. I'm Michael Brooks on a Michael Thursday. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Miles Kampf-Lassin, the web editor at In These Times, is going to explain to us the endless series of reasons why absolutely nobody should listen to what the disgraceful former mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, has to say about literally anything. Why this man's absolutely abominable career embodies the absolute worst, not only of the Democratic Party, but of all American elites. He's trying to rebrand himself or set up a new gig, and successfully he's at The Atlantic and ABC News. But we're going to talk about Emanuel's record. Donald Trump tells Democrats it's oversight or legislating, as Wells Fargo and TD Bank have already given Trump finance-related documents to Congress. HUD is going to strip protections for transgender teens, or transgender people, transgender protection at homeless shelters. The global far right strengthens its gains after an unexpected win in Australia. Far-right Narendra Modi pulls off a convincing re-election in India in bad news for minorities. And actually, in fact, despite his rhetoric, the poor in that country. U.S. officials plan to send 10,000 troops to the Midwest as Mattis, who, remember his record in Fallujah, has made his first public remarks since leaving the Trump administration to warn against a military strike in Iran. Workers at McDonald's are striking across the country today for a high $15 minimum wage and against sexual harassment. Bernie Sanders is standing with them in Dallas today as we speak, even as his campaign has used their email lists to support that protest and giving money to grassroots abortion organizations. While teaching at Harvard, Senator Elizabeth Warren did outside legal work. Some of that was very bad, including Dow Chemical defending itself against breast implants that blew up in women's chests, and on behalf of LTV Steel in their battle against the United Mine Workers and raiding their pensions. Not good. The DeVos family ends its longtime support of Justin Amash after he comes out for the impeachment of Donald Trump. Paraguay prosecutes campesinos who protested soy and agrochemicals. Leaked Proud Boys chats show members plotting violence at rallies. And Lula da Silva, the world's most prominent political prisoner, gives an hour-long interview to Glenn Greenwald in The Intercept, where he talks not only about his unjust imprisonment, but gives a sense of how the history of globalization, how to defeat the global far right. And in news that might make Matt uncomfortable, the Pentagon finally admits that it's investigating UFOs. A big legal win for Meek Mill.
They admit that every 5 years, I feel.
Yeah, you're right. Big legal win for Meek Mill in Philadelphia. And the European Union votes in Eurozone elections today. Will it be a victory for the fascist forces? Will there be an unexpected breakthrough for the populist left? And where does Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party stand in this? All that and more on today's Majority Report. The four of us are here. Sam obviously is not. And
the millennials are here.
The millennials are back. The millennials are back.
It's the Millennial Report.
It's the Millennial Report. Sam is the quintessential Gen Xer.
He sure is.
That's amazing. But yet still claims to not know who Ace of Base is. Howard Stern has a new book out. Kind of a book I think that sort of, I guess, reflects his new... Basically, on satellite radio, the guy sort of reinvented himself. He's gone from sort of like a... I guess kind of like a 80s and 90s shock jock to like a... Almost like a earthy Terry Gross. Incredible. He really is. Like, guy is an amazing interviewer.
That's so weird.
I mean, I think I'm a big Howard Stern fan from everything. I think he's funny, and I like all the old stuff. I sometimes will go on a binge where I'll listen to like 90s Howard Stern.
You like listening to him beg to see women's tits for half an hour? That's fun for you?
Yeah, sure.
It's nostalgia.
If that helps the bit. No, that actually isn't most of what that content is. I like him like bothering Jackie the Joke Man about his various career schemes as an example. So, and I also, my favorite thing, and I am someone who should not be laughing at this, but his station manager, Tom Chiasano, sent a company-wide memo, and it had a lot of grammar errors in it. So Howard had a second grade school teacher from Long Island named Mrs. D'Agostino, I think her name was, come into studio and grade the paper on air while he terrorized the station GM. And that is one of the funniest things I've ever heard in my life, and that like holds up from the 90s.
That's like something Sam would do.
That is exactly. Well, where do you think Sam gets ideas like this from? It's not like Sam was listening to those, to Howard as well. But anyways, there was actually something relevant that happened to Stern, I guess politically, back in like 2003, 2004, where the FCC was definitely fining him in a way that was specifically targeted to him. And it did have free speech implications. And it also was in a context of total vertical integration of the media landscape. And at that point, it was radio under the dominance of Clear Channel, which incidentally was also like incredibly xenophobic, pro-war, pro-Bush. They weren't playing the Dixie Chicks because the Dixie Chicks had some mild criticism of George W. Bush. I mean, as Sam says, it truly was. It now is so crazy, of course, but there is an alternative. There is an ecosystem that's accessible where you can share a community. Whereas, like, people really do. I mean, back then, going and reading like the blogosphere to get the alternative perspective was really people who were just like, yeah, I'm a Democrat. I don't want to cut Social Security. I don't think we should just sort of like torture and murder people in the Middle East. So, but Stern was fined steadily, and those fines did increase as in that point, not radically, but he became an outspoken supporter basically of Democratic candidates and of John Kerry and against George W. Bush. And Bernie Sanders plays into this. So we got a little bit of a clip, and then we're going to go in a trip down memory lane. But here is Howard Stern on Stephen Colbert explaining his, giving a sense of his history with Bernie. And then we have a throwback clip, I think from 2004, 2005, of Sanders on Howard's show. Here is Stephen Colbert with Howard Stern from last night.
Who would you be excited to have on?
Oh, gee, I don't know. That's
Joe Biden.
Sure, why not? Because Joe Biden's had a fascinating life.
Sure.
And I think it would be interesting.
Bernie.
Bernie Sanders, for sure. Bernie Sanders is probably my biggest hero for one reason. And this is very self-serving. When the FCC was attacking me and they were attempting to take me off the air, and in a big way, it was almost like racketeering. They kept fining our stations. They kept keeping us from buying other radio stations. Bernie Sanders got up in the Senate and said, I think what you're doing to Howard Stern is wrong. I believe in freedom of speech, and I want to go on record as saying you got to stop it. And it was pretty damn impressive. And I'll tell you, I was under siege at that point. I really was, and I thought it might be the end of my career.
What year are we talking about here?
Oh, geez. I don't even remember when he did it. I would have
1963?
No, a little later than that. Probably in the 90s, yeah.
Oh, wow. So he really doesn't remember. So this is actually 2005, and this is a clip, and this is great because I do love, and again, I am a Howard Stern fan, but I do love the collision in this clip of and fair enough. I totally, like no one wants their career under siege. Absolutely. But I do love like Howard's fairly specific focus and Bernie's broader focus. Check this out.
Government doesn't need to do a thing. You can do it yourself.
Congressman Bernie Sanders from Vermont, I don't mean to sound paranoid, but ever since I announced my satellite deal, I am now seeing the focus going to satellite radio as opposed to terrestrial radio. Am I the target of every politician?
No, I don't think you're the target. I think there's an effort on the part of the extreme right-wingers and people who think that because they don't like something, nobody in America should be able to hear it and see it. It's not just you.
You're the only congressman that I know. I'm going to tell you about this guy right here on the phone, Bernie Sanders. He proposed a bill to prevent the government from censoring the content of cable TV shows and internet websites.
Yeah, I read about this yesterday.
Yep. His bill was in response to the recently approved House legislation increasing the FCC indecency fines. Which
and it's in response to exactly what you talked about. It seems to me, A, it's unconstitutional. The government does not have a right to get into cable. And number two, if people are paying for what they want to see, they have a right to see it. And what all of this is about, Howard, is moving us to a less free society in many respects, cutting out different points of view. If people don't like your program, anybody else's program, you know what they could do? They could turn it off.
I just read about a religious broadcaster that was fired this week because he went on and said, someone asked him, do you think the Pope will go to heaven? It was a theoretical discussion. And the guy said something about how only born-again Christians can go to heaven. Whatever his opinion was.
Whatever his belief is.
He was fired for that.
That's right.
Now, if you, and then the guy even said that the dish goes, gee, I never did anything like Howard Stern. Why are they firing me? Because it doesn't stop with me. They're going to censor Tony Soprano. They're going to censor...
exactly what they're going to. Let me tell you what they're already doing. I don't know if you know this. You've seen the film Saving Private Ryan, right?
Yeah. Right.
Fantastic film.
Right.
ABC showed it nationally on Veterans Day. 60 ABC affiliates refused to put it on the air because they were afraid they were going to be fined.
6-0.
6-0 because obviously in the middle of a war in the film, soldiers use profanity. The PBS could not recently put it, a film, distribute it, because in the middle of the war in Iraq, bombs are going off. Soldiers use profanity. They had to censor that.
Well, here's the key question. How many of your fellow congressmen, who I'm actually losing respect for, how many of your fellow congressmen are going to support your bill?
Now, so far we've got about 10 on the bill. It's H.R. 1440. But I think when the American people learn what's going on and the fact that The Sopranos and every other show that they like on cable could be censored, then more and more people will be supporting this bill. But we need the help of the American people.
This was a really big deal at the time, and they were absolutely right. And I totally agree with him, but I love, but even just the consistency in terms of like from the big argument today about reclaiming America from the oligarchy back to like, look, if you want to listen to Howard make a total prick of himself, that should be your right. And I think if people wake up, they demand. A lot of consistency.
Can we fast forward to the part where Bernie rides the Sibian?
I remember I was driving to Burlington. Jenny McCarthy had promised to ride the Sibian for the last 3 appearances. She hadn't done it.
All of a sudden,
I thought it was about to finally happen. Then it goes silent because they decide what I can and cannot hear. So, in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, Baba Booey, Howard Stern is the king of all media. We love you, Robin. I was watching Black Monday, which is, I don't know what I think of that show. Have you seen it at all? The Don Cheadle?
Yeah, I wanted to be. I watched every episode of it, and it kind of loses track of what it's trying to do.
That's the problem, is I don't think it knows what it wants to do. But there's one character who's having like a big like F it moment, and after like a bunch of like increasingly disastrous calls to like various friends and family, basically telling them to kiss off. It concludes with like, "Hey Howard, can like Robin take her shirt off?" Which I just thought was like a really good, like, yeah, that probably was exactly the time. So sometimes you get home after work or school or wherever it may be, and you're too exhausted to do anything. You're knocked out. And maybe you're even still at the office. Maybe you're working late. Maybe it's like a Tuesday. We do TMBS on Tuesday, and it's basically an uninterrupted day that basically goes from like, I don't know, would you say like 10 to 10:30 or something like that? That's basically a Tuesday. You might want to treat yourself to a meal you deserve with an on-demand from your favorite restaurant with DoorDash. DoorDash connects you with all of your favorite restaurants in your city. Just use the DoorDash app to choose what you want to eat, and your Dasher will bring it right to you wherever you are. With over 310,000 amazing restaurants in over 3,300 cities across the U.S. and Canada, DoorDash lets you order from your favorite local go-tos as well as favorite chains like Chipotle and Cheesecake Factory. Let dinner come to you with DoorDash. Right now, our listeners can get $5 off of their first order of 15 or more when you download DoorDash app and enter promo code Majority Report. That's $5 off of your first order when you download the DoorDash app from the App Store and enter promo code Majority Report. Again, that's Majority Report for $5 off of your first order from DoorDash. And whether it's a trail of muddy footprints or a pile of dishes after your first barbecue, nothing cleans like the spring scents from Grove. Grove delivers natural brands to you that you love, like Mrs. Meyer's, 7th Generation, Burt's Breeze, and Grove straight to your doorstep. I use Mrs. Meyer's in my apartment. It does really smell good. Everything is healthier for you and the planet, plus it really works. I use all Mrs. Meyer products, hand soap, dish detergent, and not only does it smell really good, like as an actual good smell, not just like a chemical smell that like lingers over your kitchen after you clean dishes. I have super sensitive skin and I have to like wear gloves and everything, but the Mrs. Meyer's helps when you have to, because I don't have a dishwasher in my apartment, so you got to crank through them, and it helps to have a clean product like that. Right now, our listeners can take advantage of this exclusive spring offer when you place your first order of $20. Get a free 3-piece cleaning set in your favorite limited edition scent, lilac or mint or peony. That includes a Mrs. Meyer's hand soap, a Mrs. Meyer's spring soap, a Mrs. Meyer's spring multi-surface spray, a Grove Collaborative cleaning caddy, and a Grove Collaborative walnut scrubber sponges. Plus, get a 60-day VIP membership as well as a surprise bonus gift. Just go to grove.co/majority to sign up and place an order for 20 or more. That's grove.co, not com, C-O, not com. Grove.co/majority. That's grove.co/majority. We're going to take a brief break and we're going to come back and talk about the awfulness that is Rahm Emanuel's politics. back to the Majority Report. Michael Brooks here. Joining us now is Miles Kampf-Lassin. He's an editor and writer for In These Times, and he's author of the recent piece, which everybody should read. No one should ever listen to anything Rahm Emanuel has to say about politics. Miles, thanks so much for doing this.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I'm guessing, certainly in this audience, there's probably a fair amount of people that, even if they would know Rahm Emanuel's name, they'd probably also know that his politics and record are, atrocious from the perspective of, human beings and, advancing important causes like healthcare, education, police reform, and so on. But your piece, it's a user's guide to a really, really bad politician and also investment banker, in fact. But it's also someone that you can kind of use. This is one of the few people, and certainly one of the few people that isn't like a former president, that you can use to chart the modern ideological trajectory of all of the wrongs of the Democratic Party. This is a guy, I could, in some ways, especially if you take it back to the 90s, I can only really think of Bill Clinton or Joe Biden that you could use in this way. So how did Rahm Emanuel get his start? Where is he coming from? And how does he get into politics?
Sure. Well, I think you're exactly right in that analysis. If there was ever a personification of kind of the neoliberal centrist vision that has dominated the Democratic Party in recent decades, it's Rahm Emanuel. This is someone who got their start working, actually, so let's go on a little tour of Rahm Emanuel's pretty disastrous political career. He got his start actually doing fundraising, and that might not seem pernicious, but he helped to really engineer this new approach that the Democrats took starting in the 90s, focusing almost exclusively on fundraising and trying to get the support of wealthy interests. And he did that working on Bill Clinton's campaign before the 92 election. He famously helped to stuff out some of the accusations from Jennifer Flowers by doing this massive ad buy for Bill Clinton in the throes of the campaign. And then after Clinton won, he went on to serve as an advisor. And there he carried out some of the really most disastrous policies that we are dealing with the consequences of today. The main one being Nafta. He helped to write the North American Free Trade Agreement. And that's a bill that, as we know, not only helped to fuel the offshoring of American jobs, but it actually led to really the collapse of the American manufacturing center. It helped to gut the industrial Midwest, the Rust Belt, and it led to massive wage stagnation. And this is the type of results we're seeing now that have led to so much stress and depression in these states. So that's number one. He also worked on the crime bill, which helped to incite the mass incarceration crisis. He really pushed Clinton to move to the right of the Republicans on the issue of immigration. He actually, one quote he had giving advice to Clinton was to claim and achieve record deportations of criminal aliens. So that was in 96. So Emanuel's really at the center of a lot of these issues that led the Democratic Party to tack rightward. He left the Clinton administration in 98. Then he went to Wall Street, as you mentioned, he served as an investment banker. He made $16 million within the course of just a few years. As I note in the piece, that's more than 10 times what an average American will make over their entire lives. He made in just a few years. So he's firmly in the 1%, which helped lead to his moniker of Mayor 1% once he came to Chicago. But from Wall Street, he went and joined the DCCC, and served as its chair. And in 2006, he's credited with helping to orchestrate the election of Democrats to take over Congress in that year's elections. But what he actually did was he recruited all these conservative blue dog Democrats. And these were Democrats that didn't even believe in the issues Democrats supposedly were fighting for, from Wall Street regulation to health care. The list goes on. And a lot of these blue dogs aren't even there anymore because they got swept out of office in the Tea Party rise in 2010. So at the moment, it seemed like, Rahm Emanuel, this master of politics, but ultimately it really served to hurt the party, because the party then got known for engaging in all the type of elitist behavior that Rahm Emanuel now is railing against. So then after that, of course, he joined Obama as chief of staff there. He told Obama not to pursue Obamacare, not to pursue healthcare reform because it was too tough. He fought against union workers during the auto bailout. He famously said at the UAW, and he really served as a conservatizing force within the Obama administration. And from there, he parachuted back into Chicago, where he won the election for mayor in 2011. And since then, he has pushed this neoliberal approach to governance, whether it's through privatizing public services, cutting and shutting down public education and mental health, giving massive tax giveaways to tax credit giveaways to corporations, to defending a really abuse-ridden police department. He has just carried out the same type of approach to governance in Chicago. So from the very early beginnings to today, I think we can see that Rahm Emanuel's approach to politics has been a real failure especially for working people, but it's also being discredited. I mean, that's what's so incredible right now is we're seeing right in Emanuel's hometown of Chicago, we just saw the election of 6 open Democratic socialists who ran not on trickle-down economics, Emanuel's approach, but on taxing the rich and investing in social programs and changing the role of public elected officials to actually focus on democracy rather than just helping wealthy interests. So that's a little encapsulation of the career arc of Mr. Emanuel.
So that's the positive news, and that's also the reason that we still need to keep track of this guy because, again, I mean, he was exceptionally destructive because he was a destructive force as in the Clinton administration, a destructive force in the National Democratic Party, a destructive force in the Obama administration, and then somebody who really, I mean, and I do want to talk specifically about Laquan McDonald. I want to talk specifically about the war on teachers and public education because I also think, in fact, that the Chicago's Teachers Union on the countervailing side of that dynamic is in some ways they're also some of the progenitors of this much more, this very positive democratic socialist and authentically progressive politics that has been emerging in the last several years. But before we get, there's 2 things I want to get to before we get there. And one is I think it's actually really important to also go back and look at figures like Emanuel in the 90s because right now, the sort of tool of people say in the for lack of a better word, whatever we want to say, the corporate ring of the Democratic Party or the Clinton campaign in 2016, I think in some odd atmospheric ways what Biden is trying to do, and certainly what other kind of conservative Democratic candidates are trying to do, is somehow claim, and this also, this obviously really began with all of this sort of propaganda efforts against Sanders in 2016, that there is a conflict between advancing so-called social justice issues versus, the so-called economic issues, right? And of course, obviously, these policies are very intertwined and interconnected. They're distinct, but they're connected. And there was this, notion that, that was exemplified in the most extreme, ludicrous way of, Hillary Clinton doing something about Wall Street won't do something about racism, right? And of course, it's like, well, first of all, that's just insane because nobody is saying that, nobody's making that argument, but it still is something that should be done. And incidentally, as a second order thing, actually a lot of predatory Wall Street policies are in fact highly racialized, and the complete elimination of housing wealth had a massive structural racial effect on Black and Hispanic communities. Rahm Emanuel's career really demonstrates that the origins and the politics that gave birth to the Clintons and Biden, but even people who were certainly not as bad, but playing in the same playing field, whether or not it be Obama or I would certainly say a Buttigieg or a O'Rourke or a Gillibrand, that the origins of it, and in fact, Gillibrand's a good example. When she was in the House, she voted against immigration reform. She voted for guns. She voted for tough crime bills, not to mention all the Wall Street votes. That in the 90s, it was not just moving to the corporate direction on economics. It was playing to a huge amount of reactionary sentiments on immigration and welfare. And that's another area where Rahm was a huge promoter of that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, what I didn't mention before, one of the other major bills he pushed through under Bill Clinton was welfare reform. And that is, as we know now, and as how progressive economists knew then as well, it spiked extreme poverty. It cut off a lifeline, as I say in the piece, to millions of Americans who that was their basic safety net, and as a result of ending welfare as we know it, the result was that the struggling families were left out in the cold, and that was orchestrated again by Emanuel. And you bring up an important point. We can't avoid the fact that we have to call these policies what they are, and that's racist. Right. And it's because they were not, people say, there's disproportionate effects of certain policies. These policies were meant in order to, they were meant to punish poor people of color. There's no other.
That's welfare reform. It's pure racism. Pure racism.
And you could say the same thing about the school closures here in Chicago that took place. I mean, 50 public schools at the time, the largest single school closing in American history happened under Emanuel, and these were mostly in poor Black and brown neighborhoods. And so the students that were affected were the same students that are being left out of that type of economy that Rahm Emanuel is trying to build in Chicago, which is meant to replicate Silicon Valley and San Francisco, and is not meant to invest in the very neighborhoods that need it the most. So when we, and the similar thing is true in terms of the policing programs that Emanuel has, he wrote it in New York Times up that we should say the occasion for many of this dunking on Rahm is that he is now moved over to a career as a pundit.
Well, I want to get to that. I actually do want to get to that in a minute and treat it in its own terms. But maybe before we get there, get specifically into the Chicago record, and maybe you could talk specifically about the torture program that was revealed in the Chicago PD and Rahm's role in the circumstances surrounding the police murder of Laquan McDonald.
Sure. So the torture element is years ago there was a torture scandal here in Chicago that was uncovered, and essentially the CPD was torturing Black men and doing it in a very orchestrated fashion. This was not some one-off thing. Orders were coming down from on high. Actually, this was an area where there was some reckoning with the past, and now, as a result of a bill that was pushed through, the facts of this torture scandal are being taught in Chicago public schools, which is a pretty incredible thing. But the fact is that we haven't moved so far from those days of, truly vile racist policing, because as we saw in the Laquan McDonald case, there was really no doubt that there was some type of a cover-up. How involved Emanuel was in that cover-up is still being debated, but Laquan McDonald was a Black teenager who was murdered by the Chicago police. He was shot 16 times while just wielding a knife. He was shot by an officer named Jason Van Dyke. Van Dyke got charged with murder. The murder charge came out just before the videotape of the killing was released to the public, which, you can extrapolate what the ramifications of that are. And upon the release of the video, Chicago erupted in protest. Specifically, the Black community did. And they shut down Michigan Avenue, and protests reigned over the streets for weeks on end, because this was not a one-off thing. I mean, Gary McCarthy, the superintendent of police that had been appointed by Emanuel, who ended up running against him actually in this past mayoral election before dropped out, Gary McCarthy had overseen this stop and frisk program in Chicago. And we were, victims of the same type of policies that we saw happening in New York under Michael Bloomberg, where people of color were stopped and often arrested for no real reason. And police brutality is still a true issue. I mean, when the Justice Department came in and did a survey of the police department here, they found rampant abuse and issued that in a report. And yet Rahm had not been willing to go forward through a consent decree, and people were understandably not just angry at him. There was real people demanding his head, basically saying, Rahm has got to go. There was so many chants of resign Rahm. And I think that was a major reason why he decided not to run for election for a third term, because the political terrain was just so unfriendly towards him because of that cover-up and the scandal. That is not the only reason, though. I mean, it's also that the politics of the city have changed, and we can see that in the results of the election, where this whole host of progressive candidates from city council to the mayor got swept into office. I mean, it's a clear repudiation of the type of approach Emanuel had staked his whole political career on.
Absolutely. And so now that gets us to what he's trying to do now. And we'll get to this piece in the Atlantic with one of the most just incredible article titles imaginable from Rahm Emanuel. But, first of all, okay, so he's out. He's in that kind of classic position, I think, of particularly a modern Democrat, where Democratic elite politician, where he's actually incredibly unpopular with constituencies. His record, and I just also want to add the other thing in 2006 when he was, running Democratic strategy for the DCCC. He was, he had been somebody who had supported the invasion of Iraq as well. So that's another area that I just think it's worth noting, another, horrific catastrophe that he was the wrong side of. But, going beyond that, someone like Ed Rendell, hack, 1% style Democrat, natural gas Democrat, governor of Pennsylvania. He was a pundit for many years. It's a very expected track. And obviously people like this find a home at, whether it's MSNBC or NBC or wherever. This is a perspective that, people want to hear at Aspen or Davos. It really doesn't matter whether or not the policy was successful or popular, or, maybe it was successful in the sense that what it really is about is, increasing inequality and things like that. But so it's not just that Rahm is doing this and becoming another kind of garden variety pundit. And he's already proven himself to be particularly, odious. One of his first things kind of out of the gate was attacking Ilhan Omar, when the Republican jihad against her was at its most vicious. And yes, I did use that word consciously. But it's also that he's come out and wrote this column for The Atlantic called "It's Time to Hold American Elites Accountable for Their Abuses." What is he trying to do as one of the most, both an elite himself and a totally elite-serving politician? Is he writing an apology and documenting all of the failures of his career and announcing that he's going to go to a monastery? Or what else is he doing, if not that?
Well, no, I definitely don't think there's any sign of apology. I mean, what I was just talking about in terms of the anger towards Rahm Emanuel among the citizenry of Chicago, that has not gone anywhere. People here, coming from Chicago, people here remember. And it was really the activism specifically of Black youth who organized incessantly and go to every Rahm Emanuel public event and shout him down and try to make him confront his crimes against the working class poor communities of color in the city. Rahm Emanuel doesn't talk about that in his Atlantic article. In fact, the only reference to Rahm Emanuel's role in any of this he gives himself in that Atlantic piece you referenced is talking about working under Obama and saying that he pushed Obama to go after the bankers more and that he was ultimately right.
I see.
That's his rewriting of history. He's not taking any accountability for his role in creating this system wherein people are rightfully furious at elite rule in American society, nor is he recognizing the fact that he himself is the ultimate manifestation of that elite nature in which people, decide other people's lives for them because they are rich and wealthy and powerful and well-connected. I mean, that is the ultimate definition of what the governance style of Rahm Emanuel has been. Instead, he's using this kind of correct analysis. I think that, the 2016 election was largely about anger towards elites, and Donald Trump was able to benefit from that, whereas Hillary Clinton was seen as a representation of that elite supremacy in our society. Donald Trump was able to say he was fighting against it, and therefore now Democrats need to learn from that and rightfully call out the elites as the opponents that they are. I think that's all right and true, but when it comes to the solutions he proposes, they're just nonsensical. I mean, he says we need to try to achieve justice and we need to reclaim middle class values and interests. It's all this muggly-muck language that doesn't actually have any kind of policy avenues within it. And that's because he knows that what people are seizing upon is what the left is offering. And those are policies like Medicare for all, like a Green New Deal, like a jobs guarantee, the kind of things that would transform the role of government, bring more democracy, and result in Rahm Emanuel's wealthy friends like Bruce Rauner and having to pay up, having to pay their fair share in order to create a more socially just system in the United States. So that's what's going on here, I think, is that Rahm's trying to take the anger and redirect it so that people aren't bought into the message of somebody like Bernie Sanders, who famously said he was proud not to get Rahm Emanuel's endorsement back in 2016. That's clearly the kind of bête noire to this whole dance we're seeing, where Rahm is now a pundit, and he's trying to be independent and take his views as a mayor, but he's also standing for Joe Biden out here and saying that Joe Biden is exhibiting great discipline on the campaign trail.
Well, I have a question about that, though, specifically, because, and he says, and you quote, he goes, the answer certainly isn't socialism, which just amounts to a more, quote unquote, powerful bureaucracy or more, so basically, I mean, so what he's doing, okay, right. So he's totally erasing this political history, and he's maybe in a couple of meetings with people like, a totally delusional technocrat, complete creature of international financial bureaucracy like Tim Geithner. Rahm Emanuel, who is able to read a poll, was the one in the room saying, you know what, we might at least need to sort of symbolically hold some Wall Street criminality accountable. So erase the fact that he helped set the stage for all the Wall Street criminality, that he's been on the wrong side of everything.
He profited from it.
He's profited from it. He's profited from being in Wall Street and finance personally. He's part of the same system. Okay, then we need to be against the elites, but then he doesn't follow through with supports for any actual ways of being against the elites, like supporting Medicare for all. That leads me, though, to question, and I think, probably most of it will just be these sort of generic, sort of vague bromides and sort of trying to clean up his own image. And I'm sure, of course, supporting, another, far-right corporatist Democrat who's is also profoundly disconnected like Joe Biden. But what it really starts to make me worried, though, when somebody of Rahm Emanuel's profile and his racial politics and his policing policies, and then you go back to the 90s, and again, it goes back to the first part of this conversation, which was that triangulation has come to be known, I think, more in the modern, variant as, look, we're of the corporate class in Silicon Valley and Wall Street when it comes to economic policy. And that's why we really, that's why we oppose Medicare for all and so on. But you can trust us to, at the very least, symbolically discourse that we abhor racism and xenophobia. Not necessarily substantively, mind you. But if you start getting back into a rhetoric of let's talk about middle class anger and let's rail against the elites. However, we're not going to embrace any left populist economic agenda. Well, where does that anger go? Does the next wave of that mean that people like Rahm Emanuel, along with demonizing Ilhan Omar, start saying, I had some ideas about immigrants in the 90s. And in fact, Bill Clinton signed some incredible bills about immigrants in the 1990s. And in fact, look, I think Barack Obama pursued some very anti-immigrant policies and deportations as a means, again, of triangulating, but in the hopes of getting a deal. So it is a little bit different, although still setting up the apparatus and the viciousness of what we have today. But Rahm Emanuel could easily pivot this anger, if it's not going to turn into a jobs guarantee and all these other great policies, into the Democratic neoliberal version of more immigrant bashing. I mean, that's the trajectory I would see.
Yeah, well, I don't think, personally, I don't think that during the 2020 election, we're going to see the Democrats move more right on immigration. That doesn't mean that, their policies won't. I mean, if there's a Joe Biden administration, that their policies won't punish immigrants. I mean, we've seen Nancy Pelosi offer, billions of dollars for Donald Trump's wall, where she says that, single-payer health care is impossible. I think that that exists within the Democratic Party establishment.
You don't think in a general election that you could definitely see, if you took the spirit of this message, definitely not in a primary, but if you nominate a Joe Biden and all of a sudden there's this intellectual consensus that there is this anger out there of the middle class, quote unquote, and we know how racialized that term is for people like Rahm Emanuel, that anger turns into some type of, again, not the same thing, but a new version of third way. Yes, we're going to have the right position on Dreamers, but let me tell you something. We can be pretty tough on immigrants too, because God knows Joe Biden is not going to talk about Nafta. He's not going to talk about PNTR or GATT. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, but that's just the alarm bells I saw when I read that, because I was like, what anger are we talking about, Rahm?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that the real utility of this article for Rahm Emanuel is what you referenced earlier. It's an opportunity for him to try to engage with this socialist turn in the Democratic Party and try to push back against it. And in a way that it's very lazy. I mean, intellectually, he just says that socialism means more bureaucracy. That doesn't make any sense when, the type of socialist policies that are gaining support are about redistributing wealth, not about, creating some new government bureaucracies or anything like that. But Rahm sees that. So he just experienced this election, as I said, where a whole slew of socialists, the most in modern American history in a single city, just took office. That's a threat to everything he spent his political career building, this whole centrist turn. And I think he feels the need right now to take that head on. And if anything, that is a sign that the left is being incredibly effective in reshaping the political terrain on which the Democratic Party has to fight right now, that somebody like Rahm Emanuel, with, as you said, his stature, has to come out and himself make an argument against socialism. At the same time, Donald Trump is trying to red bait as well. And we saw that here in elections as well. There were candidates that were running that faced red baiting, were told, these have some crazy vision for America that's essentially un-American. This stuff is all out there, and I think Rahm needs to take that head on. So I think we're going to see more of that. I think there's going to be more Rahm editorials and ABC News appearances and everything warning against too far of a turn to the left and saying, the lessons of the past few decades show that Democrats win when they can win the suburban Pennsylvania voters, kind of the Ed Rendell approach and everything like that. The fear of there being a hard right turn in a general election with a Joe Biden, I think should worry everybody in the Democratic Party who cares about the issues that have motivated millions of voters to come out and support Democrats in 2018 and in other years. If that would basically be giving up the energetic base of the party if we had a candidate, a nominee, like reneged on all these issues that the Democratic Party has claimed to have the most progressive platform ever on. That is a real possibility, though. It's not a possibility if we nominate somebody like Bernie Sanders, but if it goes in a Joe Biden direction, then sure, that's possible. And I guarantee you that Rahm Emanuel will be out there campaigning as hard as he can for Joe Biden, or at least his vision of where he wants the Democratic Party to go. And I think that we're all smart enough after seeing Rahm Emanuel's career for the past few decades to know we should not listen to anything he has to say.
Final minute here. Is there any part of the media dimension of this you want to comment on? It's not at all surprising that he would get a perch at ABC News and that he'd get a column at The Atlantic, particularly under the editorship of somebody like Jeffrey Goldberg. But is there something, there is this enormous political energy on the left that is still not at all represented. In fact, it's usually, belittled and resisted very, vociferously in, particularly like MSNBC. We know that, again, there is not a liberal media. There's sort of a, centrist, whatever kind of media. And then there far extreme right media. And for what it's worth, I think you could also put on the table, too, I'm not obviously I'm not drawing an equivalency, but even just the ratio of like Republican voices that are not in tune with Trumpism are frankly just disconnected from the electorate. I think a lot of I think there is some centrist electorate, and they're more in the Democratic Party, like it or not. And then there is people on the left, and then there's people very much in this, nationalist right. And so you still have these like huge clusters of people that are all over these Sunday shows that still, it's like we're just in a different time zone with them, even regardless of, all the obvious ideological disagreement we have. It's just like you're not even approximating what is sort of politically out there, both in very bad ways and in very good ways. And Rahm Emanuel just seems to just so perfectly exemplify, like, of course, a hugely unpopular mayor of Chicago. Of course, somebody whose whole career has been a failure by not only the human metrics that they wouldn't care about, but even just like enduring power metrics. Well, of course he'll be there because, he has money and he just has ticks in a resume or something. It's just kind of depressing.
Well, people in positions of extreme wealth and political power in our society tend to always fail upward. I mean, we've seen that time and time again. Right. There's really no other way to see what's happened with Rahm. He should be, hiding out in some bunker planning his, return or something. Instead, he's being elevated on all these mainstream media outlets, which I think goes to show how they view politics. And he was hired to do this. This is the kind of retrograde, backwards-looking takes he's spelling out in The Atlantic, and I'm sure he will soon be doing over all the cable news shows. That's exactly the kind of voice they want to elevate. That's what these media outlets think that America needs right now. And to be honest, in The Atlantic, there's plenty of liberal readers who might be open to a more left-wing approach to politics that subscribe to The Atlantic. And that's kind of the audience for this past piece, I think, and to say, no, don't go too far. I, represent this era where Democrats were doing great, and we need to make sure that we're, providing for the great middle, and we need to, argue against ourselves to the point that we give up any hope for future that doesn't look like the past. And that's what's being offered this election by the Rahm Emanuels of the world and the Joe Bidens of the world, I think, is to a return to normalcy, to something before. When was the last time a Democrat ever won running on returning to the past? If there ever was a change election with this psychotic president in office, you'd think it would be 2020, and that way Democrats would want to embrace choosing a new future rather than returning to an era of, America is already great when the Midwest is being destroyed by the same type of free market fundamentalist policies that Rahm Emanuel and his ilk have gone for in the past. So I think that that's really what this all comes down to. Is it's not an apology tour for Rahm Emanuel. It's his attempt at to retain relevancy and to try to shift the party back in his centrist direction, the same direction we've seen be, as I said, fully discredited.
The piece is no one should ever listen to anything Rahm Emanuel has to say about politics by Miles Kampf-Lassin. You can read it in all of Miles' work at In These Times. Miles, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Take care, man. All right, folks. Rahm Emanuel, not good. He really is like extraordinarily not good. just an utterly loathsome figure in politics, and someone that you're going to have to see on your TV a lot if you choose to rot your brain by watching politics on television, which good time to read Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman, I would say. Medium is the message, right, Matt? Media studies scholar, Matt Leck.
Oh, that's McLuhan.
I know, it's McLuhan.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Postman is Amusing Ourselves to Death.
Yep.
And McLuhan's the medium's the message, right?
The deep cut for Postman is Technopoly, which is about, if memory serves, basically the technocracy and that sort of stuff, which is...
He was good. I read him a lot in college.
Yeah, I knew that Rahm Emanuel was bad before you did that interview, but now I have some very detailed talking points, so thank you.
Who are you meeting that still is like, well, Rahm Emanuel said that blah, blah, blah? Family dinners?
I don't really meet them IRL. Sometimes I
dinner.
meet them online.
They have donuts in their usernames.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Where did that donut thing? Actually, you know what? I don't care. I was going to ask where the donut thing
They're
came from.
just disrespecting
but
Nina
I don't
Turner.
care. Why would you disrespect? You know what? The
would you pick
better somebody is, the more those people get triggered by them.
Why would you pick a foodstuff to represent centrism that has an empty center?
Indeed.
Look, the center's not good, folks.
There's nothing there, folks.
Jim Hightower.
All the good stuff's around the center.
There's nothing in the middle of the road but yellow stripes and dead armadillos. It's true. It's an old book. All right, folks, become a member of the Majority Report today, majority.fm/become a member. That's how this show happens. That's how you get the real talk about a scumbag like Rahm Emanuel. And you get it for less than a cup of coffee a day. Check out justcoffee.coop, fair trade tea, coffee, or chocolate. Check out all of the mid-rolls, check out all of our sponsors. Today, Grove and DoorDash. On the Michael Brooks show this weekend, we're doing a think tank on capitalist realism, the constriction of our imaginations, and Jeff Bezos in space. The following week, we have an in-depth illicit history of Hezbollah and Lebanese politics with Dr. Drew McHale from Queen's University in Ireland. No new show next week for TMBS. We are off. But there's a huge catalog to catch up on, and now a highly clipped YouTube channel with a huge amount of content, including illicit histories of Iran, updates on Argentina, on Algeria, Biggie Smalls' artistry, and the myth of the Roaring 90s. Michael Brooks Show on YouTube, patreon.com/TMBS. Jamie.
This week on the Antifada, Andy is back from his travels with several interviews. This is out now. So he interviewed Isabel Diaz Torres from the anarchist Biblioteca Abra in Cuba. And this guy is a Cuban anarchist who was actually arrested after he did the interview with Andy for staging a protest. I believe he's been released, yeah. Okay. But he staged a protest against homophobia, and the Cuban state doesn't really let you stage your own protests. So that's interesting, and I think we're going to add some updates in the description. We also have Simón Rodríguez from Partido Socialismo y Libertad of Venezuela, who's part of the left opposition to Maduro. We also have an interview with a producer of this interesting podcast called Resonance Audio Zine, where they read to you out of anarchist zines. It's kind of like ASMR crossed with politics. And lastly, Philip Walsletter of Red May, who wraps everything up with his story of backpacking to Chile in 1973 during the coup. Wow. And I was trying to listen to it on my way here, but my fucking dongle kept going out, and I hate it so much.
Ooh, those dongles, man.
What is a dongle?
The thing that you have to connect to your phone that doesn't have normal audio jack, so you can plug your headphones into it.
It's so annoying.
Plastic things.
They break immediately.
Yeah.
They last about a month and a half, and then you have to buy a new one. And guess what? Those are very profitable for your phone companies. They make lots of money off of selling you new ones of those.
Because it's not good.
Oh, and you know what? I also want to plug, we did an episode with Swampside Chats, our comrades, the gayest, highest communist podcast probably in the world. And we talked about communization theory, and that's some galaxy brain shit. And that's going to be out on their feed first, so they can pick up some listeners from that, and eventually on our feed.
Sorry for the profanity, people. Majority Report listeners don't like profanity.
Oh, my bad. Sam's not here.
Cool. It's true. Matt?
Literary hangover. Soon I'm going to release the Margaret Fuller episode. I've been keep calling her like an early socialist. She had these, kind of the first podcaster, she had these things called the conversations that a lot of they're women only, basically for actual safe space reasons. But so women could have intellectual conversations. She was doing that in Boston. And that's actually what sort of led to a lot of her writings on women in the 19th century. and her editing The Dial, which was a transcendentalist paper.
Oh yeah.
But she had these conversations where they would actually talk about like women in Greek mythology or women from Roman times, or basically women throughout history that are were remembered for traits that at her time in the 1830s and 40s were ascribed to only men. So she was kind of like decoupling these sort of masculine, feminine binary, saying, well, throughout history, if you look at things, these women can have these traits as well. There's nobody that's purely masculine or purely feminine.
Sounds pretty cool.
She's Margaret Fuller. It's a travesty we don't know more about her because she was amazing.
Definitely. Guys, just to let you know, I know people are very excited about the IMs, but hopefully I'll have it figured out in the break. I also want to mention that tickets are available and they're moving extremely fast, and we announced it extremely early, so I would do this soon, to the TMBS Live Show, August 24th at Lincoln Hall in Chicago. Get your tickets today. We'll see you in the fun half.
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous, you're a little bit upset, you're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Grandpa.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me...
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
Welcome to the fun half. Hi, everybody. How is everyone?
Pretty all right.
I
had a dream that I slept through the whole show this morning, actually. And
was that relaxing?
It was kind of, no, it was very stressful.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've had dreams where we don't start the show until 12:30 or something like that, and everyone is just like screaming in the office.
Shit.
That sounds horrible.
I had far more anxiety
Sam
dreams.
Tantrum. Oh my god.
But
Sorry,
you know
I
what?
just had a
Tantrum
stress. Just
dream.
like 12:15. You want just cancel it? No.
But you know what? By the end of the dream, I had texted you, Michael, and you were like, "Oh, it's cool. And then I was like coming to accept that I had missed the show. I'm like, at least I got some sleep. And then my alarm went off and I woke up.
That sounds like actually a really good trajectory. That sounds like the best of all worlds. Like when you have like an upsetting dream that ends in a relaxed way and then you wake up and realize it didn't happen. That's like
I woke up and I was a bit late for work, for real.
Were you?
A little bit. Never mind.
I thought you were, I don't know. I thought you were on target.
Like 10 minutes late.
I don't count that. Like I'm not, I don't expect, by the way, it's my opinion on time is not only applied to myself. I just don't, everybody gets 10, 15 minutes.
No, I know. I wasn't afraid you were going to yell at me.
Well, I wouldn't, I mean, obviously I wouldn't to begin, but I just
I think
don't.
it's square you guys have anxiety dreams about this job.
I don't.
I had way more, I had anxiety dreams about McDonald's all the time when I worked there. And
you were living an anxiety dream.
Yeah, they're also
like
less forgiving about
company.
you being late.
Right. Really? It'd be funny if you walked in and your manager at McDonald's was just like, "Can you fucking believe what Dana Rohrabacher said?"
Just trolling the Burger King people.
Yeah. So then I tweeted back to Burger King, "Good look on your fries." So I'm going to quote tweet that, and actually that would probably make it a much. Maybe that's what working in the comms department is like.
That's competition.
Yeah. You're calling from a 509 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Greetings from sunny Orlando, Florida, Disney Resorts. This is animatronic Andrew Jackson calling from the Hall of Presidents.
Animatronic Andrew Jackson.
I actually totally agree with Stephen Mnuchin. We cannot just change the $20 bill. It would cause a great deal of security concerns. I'm sorry, I can't do this with a straight face. I'm sorry. I can't do it with a straight face.
Wait, so in other words...
Drop the act, Steve. My portrait hangs in the Oval Office. Be your worst self. Wear it with pride.
So you're saying, Mr. President...
A quick word from our sponsors. Ladies, has your menstruation got you feeling hysterical? Help ease your irrational mind with Dr. Clark Stanley's 100% cotton sanitation rags. Each rag can be rinsed out and reused for up to 3 months. And for a limited time only, get a free 8-ounce bottle of Dr. Clark Stanley's Female Remedy when you use coupon code Jackson at checkout. That's JACKSON. Female Remedy is an organic blend of unique oils and ointments designed to cure every uniquely female malady, including hysteria, nervousness, fluid retention, heaviness in the abdomen, sexual desire, and more. Dr. Clark Stanley's Female Remedy, now with 15% more opium. Don't forget, use coupon code Jackson when you check out. The #1 recommended solution for female hysteria. Quantities are limited, so act now.
Wait, so President Jackson, though, just to be
And I've got to tell you, folks, we don't just advertise any old thing on this program, okay? We've got a lot of people coming to us. We've got to turn a lot of them away. These are tried and true. I stand by Dr. Clark Stanley 100%. I'm telling you. I used to have to take Rachel to the sanatorium once a month during her special time where she was locked in a room and sprayed with a hose. It was a real hassle, especially for me. But all of that is no more. So don't forget the coupon code at checkout. This stuff is the real deal.
And you're saying that Stephen Mnuchin should
Got to
just
take a
own
break. We're going to head into the genocidal maniac half, opening up the telegrams. We'll be right back.
All right, thank you, Mr.
I'll have
President.
to try that.
I don't think he's taking any questions. Waterboat from Kashmir. Sad day Modi wins in India. India electorate is behaving more and more like the Israeli electorate with a far-right swing and with a dash of dehumanization for those their nation state occupies. So fascists are reelected or in control of Kashmir, where it is legal law for the military to do anything, including rape, murder, and torture. There are multiple articles outlining torture and rape in Kashmir in major Western press outlets this week after the elections in India are over. I mean, look, the election results in India are absolutely horrible. Modi was an early product of this global far-right authoritarian trend. We're going to get to these lilac clips in a second. And please watch this entire interview, because this is actually somebody who both has a communicative ability and capacity to actually win as a center-left candidate, and he also has a very good diagnosis of these things internationally. And there's one part, and maybe this won't be in what we clip, but like, I didn't want to play it because I mean, it's incredibly funny, but it gets into it, like if an interview with the most prominent political prisoner in the world becomes like another point to have like a petty argument about 2016, that's not helpful. But Greenwald is pushing him a lot to diagnose the global rise of the far right. Like, why is this movement succeeding? And it is. It's the poll numbers are growing in Germany. It's relevant and growing in the UK. It's governing in many respects in the UK. It's governing in the United States. It's governing in Brazil. It's governing in India. It's governing in Hungary. It's governing in the Philippines. It's governing in Israel. It's governing in Russia. We know all this stuff. But it's governing in Argentina. And Lula, when he pushes him on when Greenwald pushes Lula in the United States, Lula basically says, he's like, Glenn. And he says in Portuguese, but the verbatim quote is like, I know Hillary Clinton pretty well. The Democrats could have definitely found somebody who was more appealing. It's like the direct quote. And he's just like, look, he's like, maybe if Obama was running for a third term, it would be different. Maybe if I was allowed to run, it would be different. And I think this is a really important point because as much as these fights are ideological, there's also just like people need to start treating being a politician as like something that you develop professional capacity in and you actually do effectively from a communications and campaigning standpoint, because that's just an inescapable part of how you're going to win or not. And in India, Gandhi was literally inherited dynastic power with very little charisma and the opposite biography arc of Narendra Modi. Narendra Modi's father was a tea seller. Came up literally from a profoundly disadvantaged position, which has been amplified and propagandized in the Indian electorate. So anyways, let's place these Lula clips. He had an hour with Greenwald. These interviews were requested before the 2018 election. They were refused by the Brazilian Supreme Court. He was silenced during an election that, again, he led by double digits in the polls and was sentenced without any material evidence. It always bears repeating. And it's in Portuguese, so if you're watching, you'll see the English subtitles, but we'll slow it down a touch so I can repeat it for people that are listening. The first question has to do with his treatment in prison, where he is being held in solitary confinement. And Lula is going to speak on that, but also make a point about the poverty of Brazil. So let's start with clip number 2 with Glenn Greenwald and Lula da Silva. Many people have been asking me how you've been treated in prison, and you've said many times that the authorities here are humane and professional. Is this still the case? I don't know what humanitarian treatment means in prison means. I'm locked up and I'm in solitary confinement, and it really is solitary because most of the time I'm completely alone. I meet with my lawyers and that's it. And with my family once a week. I don't know whether to consider this decent. What allows me to endure this without loathing it and with a brighter outlook is knowing that there are millions and millions of Brazilians living in freedom who are in worse conditions than I am. At least I have an opportunity to have lunch and dinner. Well, Brazil, it is a country that you governed for 8 years in a country with many people in prison. How would you compare your treatment in this prison with the treatment they get in all the other prisons? Take the Brazilians who live in houses, stilt houses above swamps. They're living as second-class citizens. A citizen has to live in a single 9-square-foot room, has to have lunch, dinner, and has to cook, make love, go to the bathroom, and do everything in those 9 square meters. That's not living any better than I am here. That's why I'm less concerned about my situation. Okay, so that's just reorienting. And I think this is very important because that sort of earthy language and direct description of how millions of people are living is why this guy was able to rise without any formal education, coming from extreme poverty, and get into leadership. But this is where this is, I think, important. And there was a lot of conversation on both the Workers' Party record, but also the rise of the far right and how to answer it and Lula's perception of it. So here he is. He's talking about the right's rise across the globe. This issue... Wait, is this slowed down? Oh. I don't... This is neoliberalism in the PT? Well, there's 3 and 4 on the list. So I have the difference, class politics in Brazil, the difference between him and Bolsonaro, and then there's explaining the ultra right-wing rise in the globe and the left reaction. Is that it? That's number 3? Okay. Yep. What's the relation between population suffering and their sudden embrace of far-right leaders? Like Bolsonaro and others throughout the democratic world. Neoliberalism, as it arose during the era of globalization, is losing ground everywhere. It is not just losing ground to the left, but also to the right. And as it lost to Hitler and to Mussolini. And at the same time, we've had 2 recent examples in Spain and Portugal of the left coming back during elections. And even in Germany, where Angela Merkel is a very strong politician, she hadn't formed a coalition with the Social Democrats, she wouldn't be in power. But even there, the far right is growing. I know, it's growing the world over. And I think it's a warning call for the left. Yes. But the right wing won't. You can be sure of the fact that Bolsonaro and Macri, Cristina Kirchner will win in the next elections. In Brazil, the left wing will win the next election. You can be certain that if Evo Morales runs for president, he'll win in Bolivia. At the same time, I hope that Americans will have the good sense to prevent another term of Trump as president. Because he's not just a problem for the U.S., he's a problem for the whole world. So,
blaming the electorate with Lula da Silva.
Well, actually, not exactly. Not exactly at all. But there was another clip where he explains, and it's interesting in light. I wish we had pulled it. Maybe I'll pull it another time for TMBS, where he talks about the origins and Thatcher and Reagan of this globalization model. And the first thing he says about it is, he literally in the Lula, he's like free movement of capital, not people. As he sets the stage for how to understand how that works. But then I think this is really important, because what he's identifying, though, in the sort of left that's regaining power and could still win, is he's talking about people like Morales, who really do have populist politics. And then he's also talking about people who are effective communicators and able to actually counteract this trend. And then in this clip, he's going to talk about specifically to Brazil, because what Glenn is doing is Glenn is talking about how PT fits into this sort of like broader pattern in Brazil. But Lula says, like, look, we're here because of my successes, which is a really important point. And also how the Brazilian elite, and I think this is where we can start looking at socially reactionary politics as being of the elite in many different cases, as a sort of even cultural reaction to other people just even coming up, even if their position isn't threatened. So let's play this final clip where he talks about class politics in Brazil and Bolsonaro. The rise of other... I can't read that because of the blur. The rise of Bolsonaro and other extremists and neoliberal ideologues in both the country and in a country, and how you run the country, how Dilma ran the country, yeah. and those ideologies, what difference do you see? Glenn, you started this interview, I said clearly that PT's biggest problems, that's the Workers' Party, come not from its errors, but from its successes. Every time that president tries to enact socially minded policies in Latin America, they're eventually ousted. The elite in Brazil and in other countries don't accept economic development policies that contain social inclusion. PT managed to enact, and this is according to the UN, not me, the greatest changes in social inclusion in the history of this country. It's important to remember that during our mandate, it was the only time in history that the poor had a higher rate of economic upturn than the rich. The rich made gains too, but the poor had an even greater percentage. It was the only time in history, and this bothered people. You should have heard it in the Rio de Janeiro airport, in the Sao Paulo airport, when people said the airport's starting to look like the bus station with all these poor people around, people who've never taken a plane in their life. And I actually think that when you look at the base of the Trump electorate, which is actually like people making a pretty good income in pretty ethnically homogenous white suburbs, that other sense of it's not just, and this is where I think some of the distinction between economic fear and social reactionary politics in some ways collapses, because you can both fear that you might lose actual material resources as well as status, which you can't just separate all the time. They're interdependent and interacting. And also that you resent, even if you're still feeling well, and this is, I think, where it is the pure status thing, even just the visual of people coming up from the bottom and emerging. And Lula spoke exactly about that dynamic in Brazil, because that is what happened. You had tens of millions of people taken out of poverty, living radically better lives. And there is a cultural contingent that Bolsonaro tapped into, which is why there's an even higher murder rates of police among of innocent people. He's saying farmers should have the right to kill people without cause if they go on their land. That's all part of that same psychology. I'd recommend people watch the whole interview. There's a lot more. Obviously, we can't play all of it. I'll play more of it on TMBS later. And as always, you need to talk to your Democratic candidates and representatives about this. And there's been letters, one in 2018, one in the spring, that have involved Brazil, but only one in 2018 that specifically dealt with the Lula case and how barring his candidacy was undermining Brazilian democracy. There needs to be a lot more. I don't take anybody's progressive bona fides remotely seriously if they're not talking about Lula's imprisonment. It's astonishing and disgusting. And it's also amazing because this is a very good strategic mind. Like, this is somebody who has a lot of lessons for how this works and how these trends can be counteracted, which he gets into a lot more detail in the full interview. You're calling from a 757 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
This is Sebastian from Florida. Can you hear me?
Hi, Sebastian. How are you? What's on your mind?
I'm excellent. I wanted to ask you about a trend that I'm sure you're familiar with online of, very reactionary, politics that's, I think, kind of sprung out of the Gamergate, nonsense and, all this weird stuff happening around, video game controversies and, people like Sargon came out of that. I want to ask you, how do we fight against that?
How do we fight? Well,
we're doing it.
We're doing it. Watch the show. I think we do.
Yeah.
I think.
Besides you guys, because.
Well, paint a. What do you mean besides us? How do you as a person fight it?
Well, I wish there were more. I mean, like, you guys are doing a great job. I just wish there were more people like you.
Watch
out there,
H Bomber Guy.
balance it out.
H Bomber Guy specifically
Yeah.
is somebody who does a lot of good content on this stuff.
Also, ContraPoints often addresses the alt-right specifically, and she's actually won some people over back from being alt-right Pepes.
And I'm going to deal with some of this in my book.
My favorite is
Thanks for the call, man.
My favorite is Timba on Toast, but I think
Yeah.
you know I understand people asking questions like this and like this about other topics, and the thing about it is, like, you can just start a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Like, it's the problem. I mean, not everybody can, right? There's, like, obviously some like capital requirements, like you need to have equipment and things like that, and it does take time. But the barrier to entry is so low that you just kind of need to do it.
Absolutely.
Do you guys think, this is something I've been thinking about with regards to this topic, because we get these calls a lot, and I think it's kind of like a canary in the coal mine situation, because this, like, and that story about that girl Soph, like, there's going to be a generation that is just, like, purely brought up online, and it's going to cross over into the mainstream, and, like, mainstream media is not going to be able to, like, say, like, oh, it's just online or whatever.
Right.
Like, at some point, like, the culture at large is going to have to reckon with this, and I mean, I guess us planting seeds like now is really important, but I wonder how, you know, mainstream media will react to it when it gets to that boiling point.
I don't think it's made for the mainstream. Like, Like, I think as soon as it rears its head, people react against it, because I think this is actually a human nature thing. I think people don't actually like this.
No, I don't think they do. I also think it's a really tricky balancing act between, like, the president of the United States represents these things, and it's totally of American history. It's of the Republican Party and so on. And then at the same time, I also don't want to feed. I'm not going to. So it's like, some people talk about this stuff in a way where I think they're both undermining the severity of the crisis in some ways, because it's literally, white supremacy, as an example, is represented at literally the center of American power and governance. And then at the same time, I agree with Matt. I think, like, the full, like, cosplay Nazi world, I think it's really toxic. I think it's really dangerous. I think it's because we're in this ecosystem, we need to address it. I think it has a limited, broad appeal. I do. And I don't want to feed, like, I just don't buy. I think there is, like, Brandon on TMBS the other day was just like, yeah, Nazis, who cares? Like, F them. And I think that's in some ways an extremely healthy attitude. If you balance that with the fact that literally we are in a decadent Roman racist empire.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're talking about a few different things here. But if you want to look specifically at the sort of online alt-right, the degree to which they believe that the left is only these unfun social justice warriors who are also quite neoliberal in their politics. This is why it is important to have something like a fun podcast where you talk about the left in a way that people can understand, in a way that's accessible, and, like, you know, on the part of people who you might like to be friends with, because it's a parasocial relationship that happens a lot of the time on the alt-right, as well as on the quote-unquote alt-left, or whatever you want to call it. So if they only know about the left from, like, Ben Shapiro, they're going to have a different view of us than if they actually listen to some of these alternative outlets.
100%. I want to touch on this story. I'm not going to make, you know, I think that this is like a story that needs to be talked about and is relevant for understanding a candidate. I don't think it's I think there's plenty of stories like this that are worth noting. I don't know if they're like, I don't think this is not a reason. I mean, I've explained obviously why I think Bernie Sanders is the choice over Elizabeth Warren. And I think this story is relevant for people to know, but I don't think it's like, well, and this is it. I mean, here's your reason why you can't vote for her. I don't view it like that at all. I actually view some of the foreign policy stuff as much more, to me, if you're having that global perspective, to be extremely problematic. But I do think that this is relevant. I think if And this is about some of Senator Warren's work as an attorney. If Bernie Sanders, who, sure, he's frankly had, he's basically been a politician and, sort of a bohemian, which I happen to like about the guy. But he had a business where he produced educational strips for schools and basically was in some kind of small form of documentary filmmaking / PR, whatever you want to call it. If it happened that before the guy was mayor of Burlington, he happened to take a crisis PR job for Raytheon, I think that would be a valid thing to put into the docket. And I apologize. I know this will offend a lot of lawyers. I do think being an attorney is obviously innately more valuable than being a crisis PR person, but I don't buy some vast moral gulf between who you choose to represent for money as an attorney versus who you choose to do comms for, to carry the analogy. And it so happens that when Senator Warren was teaching at Harvard University, she took on over 50 legal matters and she charged well for them, which I just want to say is not the point. Great. I'm glad she made a lot of money. And I've noticed that some people in defending her have zeroed in on how much money she made, which is, it's not even like not the point. It's just not even, it's like talking about what train she took to get to these jobs. It totally doesn't matter. And salut. I hope that Elizabeth Warren is a multimillionaire. I think that's great. I don't care.
Sorry, the Khaleesi has a dragon.
Yeah, right. I mean, it does get to that kind of nonsense. But I do think it is relevant that, including in recent iterations, she advised, as an example, in 2003, she served, in the past, in the Dow Chemical in the mid 1990s. She advised them, and I'm quoting that from the Washington Post, in the mid 1990s, one of her most controversial clients was Dow Chemical, which she advised in the mid 1990s as a subsidiary that manufactured silicone gel breast implants, faced hundreds of thousands of claims from women who said their implants caused health problems. Dow Chemical denied that it was playing a role in designing or making the implants and sought to avoid liability as its subsidiary Dow Corning declared bankruptcy. In this case, Elizabeth served as a consultant to ensure adequate compensation for a woman who claimed injury from silicone breast implants who otherwise might not have received anything when Dow Corning filed for bankruptcy, is I think the response from the campaign. So that's one. That's certainly not on the side of consumers to be representing a company that had silicone blowing up in women's chests, essentially. She also, and I think this is very troubling to me, she helped travelers gain immunity from asbestos litigation, and in a very significant case,
helped them settle a payment thing for consumers, and then when she left, they didn't have to face liability charges and didn't have to set up that payment.
Right, but after, yeah. And then there's the case of LTV Steel, which put, and I'm quoting again from the Post, which put Warren at odds with Richard Chomsky, who was then president of the United Mine Workers, now president of the AFL-CIO. In that instance, Warren argued in a document to the Supreme Court to help LTV battle a new law that required it to put aside millions of dollars to fund health care for retired coal miners. According to the Globe, Warren maintained that she was supporting an important legal principle that would help workers receive needed aid sooner. In testimony before Congress, Trump argued that there shouldn't be an exception to the rule. When it unravels, you will have roughly 200,000 miners and beneficiaries out there who will lose their health care, he told Congress. Trump didn't appear to hold a grudge and subsequently campaigned for Warren in her 2012 Senate bid. So, look, it's just important to put on the docket. It's important to put on the docket that Bernie Sanders supported drone policies in 2016. It's important to put on the docket that, Kamala Harris had poor mothers arrested as part of a horrifying truancy policy. And it's important to put, just the endlessly exhausting list of Joe Biden, credit card, Iraq, and everything else, on the docket. But, Elizabeth Warren has a brand that is built entirely on the central axis of these types of issues. She doesn't have a foreign policy. She doesn't have a military policy that, would be deemed progressive in a sort of authentic assessment. But she's rightly built an incredible career and generated an unbelievable amount of great policy ideas on the axis of these specific types of issues. It is relevant and legitimate to note and be aware of the fact that she has been on the other side of these types of very bread and butter middle class issues, using her legal skills to help corporations get away with harming people or not paying their obligations. Sorry.
Well,
that's not, I don't plan on covering it more, but that is a legitimate story.
This is not inconsistent with the trajectory that we know Elizabeth Warren has taken, right? Like, she used to be a Republican. She used to have terrible politics. Now she's got better politics. And, if her campaign were smart, they would use this as part of the story. She could say, look, I used to be on the wrong side of these things in my career as an individual. And then I came around. I saw the light. I founded the Financial Protection Bureau, and I wanted to change things on a level of policy. But I don't see them going that way.
Yeah, it was my job just doesn't fly. You have to have a story about how you felt awful doing some of those things.
Right. Or like Jamie's saying, you put it in a different context now. I think that's another, that those types of spin in favor of it are, they're just not going to cut it in our context. And frankly, with the, look, Sanders and Warren have, people are looking at them in a different way because they represent different things in politics. I don't, Pete Buttigieg, there's a story we don't have time to get to today. A new story about Pete Buttigieg that, I believe it was a woman's son, it was something that, I forget the specifics of it. I don't have it with me, but something very serious and disturbing in South Bend, Indiana, involving a teenager. Buttigieg said, call, I'll follow up. Woman says he never followed up, right? Like, Beto O'Rourke speaks in word salads, takes money from oil companies. Like, there's nothing about these other candidates that Cory Booker's whole career was facilitated specifically by people like and including Betsy DeVos. You've got some candidates with some huge problems here, obviously starting with Joe Biden. So
we also have to remember, whoever it is, as soon as they get into office, there are going to be powerful forces pulling them to the right.
Without a doubt.
And given the choices, like if we have a choice between somebody who's always had great politics and someone whose past is checkered, I'm at least going to go with the person who's been most consistent through the years, even knowing that that person will be subject to the same forces.
Precisely. You're calling from a 917 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Billy calling from Vancouver.
Hey, Billy, what's going on? What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. I'm just calling to see why Cliff Schecter has not been appearing on the show frequently.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't handle the bookings, man.
Yeah, because I feel like you guys have a kind of a glass half empty syndrome when it comes to Mayor Pete. Like, he's for Medicare for all, so isn't that something to be celebrated rather than being announced as a candidate?
So I don't know if you're messing with me, but here's what I would say.
No, I'm serious. Yeah.
Okay, so here's what I'd say. All right, here's the serious. I'll give you a serious answer. When it comes to Medicare for all, Bernie Sanders is absolutely in a league of his own because he's advocated for it for decades, including when nobody else took it seriously. Elizabeth Warren, that's been another major question mark for me. While she's co-sponsored it, she hasn't been clear and unequivocal that she'll push for it. And frankly, other candidates like Gillibrand or Harris or Booker, who a year ago I was quite happy to give them credit in the context of a campaign season, I don't buy it. I don't think that they have the commitment demonstrably that someone like Bernie Sanders has. Now, secondly, Pete Buttigieg, in addition to all of the truly, I mean, look, if you care about policing issues, if you care about gentrification, if you care about inequality, this guy's already going to have a huge amount of glaring problems beyond the point that, like, and I've just been criticizing Elizabeth Warren, but the point that still stands of, like, why are we even talking about this guy when you could be talking about Elizabeth Warren? I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous. This is his position. I'm going to read you now from the Hill. We have this up on screen because this is misleading. Pete Buttigieg, this is what he said, and these are all the candidates' positions on Medicare for All. Buttigieg has said that he believes the country should, quote, move in the quote unquote direction of Medicare for All, but that private health insurance companies shouldn't be eliminated. In a town hall meeting earlier this month, Buttigieg endorsed what he called, quote unquote, Medicare for All who want it, in which Medicare type public option be available and you can invite people to buy into it. So that, again, that's literally a public option or a Medicare buy-in, which would definitely be better than what we have now, but it's absolutely not single payer. In fact, I'll give you this. The only argument inside people who authentically support Medicare for All is people who want to eliminate all private insurance companies, period, because they're fundamentally a structural danger to people's health and a parasitic, dangerous industry, or some people who say every single piece of essential, necessary human health care needs to be public, single-payer Medicare for all. But, you know, if somebody wants to have like a plastic surgery clinic, sure, whatever, they can have that as a side thing. Okay, that's the only argument. So what Pete Buttigieg is putting forward is not Medicare for all. So even in the it's better than what we have now, but it's well short of what we need. So he's not a great candidate.
I'll also say this.
I don't know what to tell you.
Even if Buttigieg takes off, he's going to have the exact same problem Bernie had last time, which is that he has absolutely zero support from people of color, and you don't win a Democratic primary like that. So he's kind of a waste of time, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess I'm also not going to do fake, look, I think sometimes you say provocative things or you sharpen a disagreement to put a perspective forward or create some dynamism on air. There is like an entertainment component to this. But when it comes to look, this is a serious thing. And I take things like Medicare for All or Iran or whatever, or the environment or policing or gentrification. I care about this stuff. This isn't, if I just wanted to be sort of, mucking about kind of like the entertainment component, then we should be talking about the music industry or sports, because those people have much more fun personalities generally. Pete Buttigieg, it's a progressive show. He's not a progressive candidate. Sorry. I don't know what to tell you. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. You just think that Buttigieg has a lot more downsides than Kamala Harris.
I think Kamala Harris they probably have comparable downsides. She might have equal downsides, but he doesn't have her upsides, right? First of all, she's a senator. Mm-hmm. So I'm not huge on people's credentials and career, but a United States senator from California that represents a radical demographic breakthrough is automatically a more on paper, and look, I accept that Buttigieg is an openly gay man. Absolutely, there's some significance to that, and we've acknowledged it. But on a job level, de Blasio is an infinitely more serious candidate than Buttigieg, with a more progressive record, mind you. He just actually announced a new thing today about public funding for local and ethnic owned small media in New York, which is the translation of is going to hire more local journalists are going to get jobs. Now, I don't like Bill de Blasio, but he also did universal pre-K. Pete Buttigieg has nothing to talk about that he's done in South Bend. So Kamala Harris, I will never support her because of, criminal justice, because of her campaign contributions, all of these things. But she's a United States senator who could be the first an African-American, Indian woman, Caribbean woman elected president of the United States. And she's a senator from the biggest state. This is a mediocre mayor from the third largest city in Indiana. Why are we talking about him? I don't get it. It makes no sense.
I think also if you really think Pete Buttigieg is going to be I mean, it's cool. I mean, interesting to say that he has, seen a bump in the polls and has gotten past Beto. He obviously has some charisma, and like media people see a mirrored image of themselves in some way with him.
You just nailed it. That's all of it is.
If you don't, I mean, like, this is just going to be like the first stepping stone in what's going to be like a probably long career in, centrist, like mainstream Democratic policy and politics with Pete Buttigieg.
I don't
He's
like
be
Midwest
around.
Macronism. It's not my politics. It's not my politics.
Well, they saw themselves in Hillary, and they see Hillary in him. Right? You guys seen the meme going around? What if Hillary were a gay millennial?
Oh, God. Jesus, I don't want to see that.
That says it all.
No, yeah, that does say it all, and none more need be said. Billy, anything else? Anything else you want to say? You got anything?
No, I don't completely buy that he's had significantly a ton more downsides than Kamala Harris. I mean,
hey,
so he's
look,
more of an incrementalist.
We said that they both have lots of downsides.
But why do you want us to spend look? If this was, and I know sometimes people really complain about coverage of other countries, which I think is just demented, to be honest with you. But we just capped. Like, I could have done more 15 minutes on Lula, another 15 minutes on Lula, right? That guy is that is a history-defining global. There's geostrategic implications with what's happened in Brazil, with the BRIC countries, and with what's happening in South Africa, what's happening in China. Like, you want us to spend an incredibly limited amount of time delineating the relative lack of merit of two candidates that none of us are going to support anyways because they represent conservative wings of the party. Like, I mean, I'm not trying to be impatient, man, but like, maybe you should start your own podcast. I think this might be the answer for all these, if you're interested in Pete Buttigieg and why he has 0% support among South Carolina black voters.
Check out Unprecedented.
Yeah, you could. I mean, Cliff has a podcast. No, I'm not all kidding. There's not a joke. He has a podcast. I'm sure he probably is covering.
Not as robust as your guys' podcast, though.
Well, I can't comment on that, but I'm sure he's covering people like Buttigieg.
But this is from May 13th. Poll: Buttigieg has 0% support among South Carolina black voters. Like,
it's because black people don't like Alfred E. Dubin.
He's not a real thing. Yeah, exactly. They don't read Mad Magazine.
They hate Mad Magazine.
I thought that was
in
more
living
of a
color,
tongue-in-cheek
folks.
thing. It's more of a tongue-in-cheek.
All right, Billy, thank you. Thanks for the call.
Right.
Good luck.
Okay.
Thanks.
He's just not a thing.
I'm not talking about this guy anymore. I'm sorry. You're calling from a 516 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? 516.
Hello. I'm Joan. I'm calling to talk about the New York Health Act.
What's the New York Health Act? Please tell us.
The New York Health Act, like Medicare for all New York.
Okay, and are you calling from New York?
Yeah, I'm calling from Long Island.
Oh, okay, cool. Got it. Thank you. Go ahead.
So there's a public hearing on May 28th. And basically we're trying to like pressure the state senators to get like on board with the New York Health Act.
Great. Where's the hearing being held? What can people do?
In Albany, there's like a sign up online for to get on bus.
Okay, what do you know the name of the website or any way people could find that?
It's on like the Campaign for New York Health and the National Nurses United.
The National Nurses United. And there's a public hearing. Okay,
Yeah.
That's great. And now, is there anything else you'd like to get to? Maybe why you think that we should give Beto more time than Julian Castro or vice versa? I'm just kidding. I'm just joking.
I would say probably like less coverage of both of them and more coverage of Lula.
Yay! Exactly.
Hell yeah.
Thank you for an excellent call. Do you have anything else you'd like to add? I mean, literally anything else, because this is I'm sorry. I'm going to go on a limb here. I'm going to say a practical way that you could help single payer happen in New York City, and then a shout out to Lula is basically the best call ever.
There's a phone number to call your New York State senator.
Yeah, actually, please let us know all of this. Okay, what's the number, or how can people find it?
Phone number 202-888-8255. 202-858-717.
Say
let me just repeat it.
Yeah, please repeat it. Is somebody getting this down? Okay.
Okay.
Please repeat it.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, it's 202-858-1717.
Okay, and people can find the other on the National Nurses United, on Nurses United, on this public hearing. On
let me just double check the link.
Okay.
We've also been
it's on the National Nurses United, and that's the phone number to call your New York State Senator.
Awesome.
That's great. We've also
It's
been
like the
doing
fight
work
to
on
win.
it in the NYCDSA, so you can get involved through that too if you like.
Okay, so that will call. Actually, that's not your New York State Senator number. I think I read the wrong number. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's the wrong number. Okay, we're gonna find that. Somebody will find that number. No worries, please. That's we should be doing stuff like that. We will find the right number and put it on the blog post and maybe read it out later. But it's a New York Health Act. Thanks so much for the call. Appreciate it, Joan. Good luck.
Thanks. Bye.
I mean, that's how you do it. That's how you do it. That was quite a. It was just like the Pete Buttigieg. Just never. I'll also, I'll acknowledge my own. I just don't get that
Like,
one,
why?
folks. Like I can put myself in a point where I get Harris. I can obviously get Warren. I can get Gabbard in some ways. I can get.
This is all
This is
where I get anti-electoral. Like, why are we
Right.
talking about these people unless they're unless in the top
Yeah.
Like, it just doesn't matter.
They're
It's
not going to
literally a waste
win.
of time.
Absolutely. And frankly, I'm sorry. And look, and if we're going to talk about people that aren't going to do anything, I want to talk about like Mike Gravel. Like that is where I'll flip my position because he is actually coming out there and contributing to the public discourse. Pete Buttigieg is in the meetings with all of the other people that are the problem trying to stop Bernie Sanders. He's the problem.
He's presenting well enough to try to steal away some young, naive
Right.
Bernie bros that aren't very plugged in.
Right.
Like that's where the Medicare for everybody who wants it.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
okay, well, are you going to make it so everybody wants it or not?
Yeah, it's just such.
If you are a real progressive, why would you not choose the most progressive option?
100%.
The only reason that I can think of is electability, and I think we've taken those arguments apart very thoroughly on this show.
Quite. Now, speaking of which, this is another thing we don't talk about enough. The European Union is having elections today, and this is a major test for the future of the European Union, which is obviously under tremendous stress, facilitated by the catastrophe of austerity after the Eurozone crisis. And now there's a real rise. I mean, the extreme right is polling very well. We have Yanis Varoufakis' project. The New York Times, of course, calling them all populist parties without making any meaningful distinction, as David Adler pointed out.
Many sides.
Many sides. But this is Jeremy Corbyn, who still leading the British UK Labour Party, still person who may very well become prime minister soon and address the multiple crises, not just the Brexit crisis, but the inequality crisis of the UK. And he's telling people to get out to vote and what these elections are going to be about from the Labour perspective.
When I read the propaganda being put out by the far right in this European election, where they're blaming Muslims for all the ills of our society, change that language to the language that was used in Germany in the 1920s and 30s, where they tried to blame Jewish people for all the ills of society, then you begin to see where this leads to. In these European elections, if they stay home and the far right go out to vote, you're actually giving support to the far right because you're strengthening their position in order to gain somebody being elected. It's that important. This country has become economically the most divided country in Europe. When children go to school and have to beg the teacher for something to eat, when a head teacher in Leeds describes a child following another to pick up the apple core out of the bin to eat the remains of the apple the first child hadn't quite finished. That, in modern Britain, the fifth richest country in the world, something is very badly wrong. we to be the generation that cascaded poverty from one generation to the other? Or are we to be the generation that challenged the injustice, the inequality? I know what it's going to be. We work together for the future. We invest together for the future. We defeat the far right. We elect Labour MPs, and we get that general election as soon as the Tories have chosen a new leader for us to defeat, so that we win, and we win for the many, not the few. Liverpool, thank you.
We absolutely need him to become the UK Prime Minister, and we absolutely need a good election result in the European elections. Just briefly from David Adler.
So good.
Right, he's great. From David Adler writing in the New Republic, will the radical right break the EU? He wrote, if the crisis of the early 1970s created the conditions for European integration, for Europe's economic integration, the crisis of 2008 did so for its political integration. Until 2008, the impressive march of European legislation had been an elite affair conducted almost exclusively by high-ranking officials far from public view. Politics, even as Europe's economies grew ever closer, remained national, a context between domestic coalitions left and right, rich and poor, north and south. The financial crisis suddenly revealed to citizens across the continent that the extent to which their countries have been bound together, stripping away the language of peace and prosperity to expose an economic architecture that served some against others, instigating mass political movements to reconstruct it. But of course, I mean, that's true, but the main story out of 2008 has been Germany demanding ruthless austerity on the southern zone, which has destroyed and gutted Greece, the pressure on even the core on their social models, and then the growth of the far right harnessing that to his advantage. And one other thing I just want to keep in mind, unfortunately, I didn't get it in the packet, which is my mistake, but there was a tweet from another British Labour MP who just basically said, he's like, look, definitionally, the far right can never be working class because the working class is multi-identity. So they don't represent it, period. We represent all of it, every single background. And that is that synthesis of a socialist cosmopolitan position, which you need to pursue. And I would add, along with the types of clarity that I do think people like Sanders and Corbyn have in their speech. It's not charisma in the sort of like airbrushed sense, but it's no bullshit. It's direct, it's clear, and it speaks to people's experience. So please go out and vote for Labour and other actual left parties in these European elections. It's very important.
That's such a good point. I'm going to use that next time I'm arguing with somebody on the battle place of ideas. The right is the one doing identity politics
100%.
because they're the ones keeping people out based on their identity. Contrary to popular belief, the left does not hate white cis men because white cis men are part of the working class.
This is another great clip of really centering and anchoring what's been happening in the United Kingdom. And I just think this is so important because, of course, Brexit is a crisis. And, of course, Brexit has caused myriad problems. And, of course, Brexit as a vote reflects all of these trends. It reflects the rise of the far right. It reflects the role of even like Breitbart and Cambridge Analytica and all of these dangerous extremist oligarchs like the Mercers and even this sort of half serious, half ridiculous role of Steve Bannon, and also, of course, just general dissatisfaction and rage at the system and misplaced populist anger. There is a Lexit position, but the UK is in crisis totally independently of Brexit. It's in crisis in terms of poverty, which started accelerating under the Cameron-Clegg conservative Lib Dem coalition, which people should be thinking about there because Lib Dems are starting to tick up in the polls. And you should remember that the last time you handed them any sort of key, they helped accelerate poverty and austerity across the United Kingdom. These crises are multifaceted. They're direct to the economic policies of the Tories and global neoliberal governments. And it's And while Brexit is real, it is in the interest of a certain part of the media class and political class to bang on that exclusively. And in this clip, Laura Pidcock, who's a Labour MP, just does an excellent job on this BBC morning program of talking about how over the past several years pre-Brexit that the Tory conservative austerity policies is gutting and destroying the UK. And that is a fundamental crisis.
And you know what I'm really surprised about? Only Marsha de Cordova talked about this. This is a damning report from the United Nations and Philip Alston. It talks about 14 million people living in poverty, 1.5 million people destitute. And while we obsess
let's stick to schools, because you're moving on to something slightly different here. But
it's all part of the fabric of what kind of society that has been created by this government. We have obsessed on this programme about the disintegration of the Tory party. Fine, but that does nothing to help the 1.5 million people who are destitute. This talks about homelessness increasing sevenfold. This talks about it being, the DWP creating workhouse-like conditions. This is in any other circumstances, Joe, this would have made a government fall. What kind of terrible...
But that must be your fault as the opposition, because you've not done enough to bring these issues to the fore, to force them to fall.
That is absolutely not true. We have time and time again
Pause it. That's your responsibility as a media that is so bad, you're literally undermining her ability to do it right now. She just complained about their party not foregrounding these issues by interrupting her foregrounding these issues. But go ahead.
Time and time again, put parliamentary questions, written questions, opposition day debates. The government do not turn up for these because they have no majority.
Yeah, I'm going to have to stop. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm going to have to stop. I'm going to have to stop. But we have at least talked about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Leftist BBC.
Yeah, the leftist BBC can't even deal with a member of parliament articulating that now the United Nations, along with the United States, by the way, the United Nations also documented the obscene poverty of the United States, that first world developed countries under this model of governance have obscene levels of poverty. And that is a crisis that predates Brexit. And if you don't think that those experiences and attitudes influence things like Brexit, you're delusional. I think that there was some absolutely correct and necessary pushback, and a lot of the numbers are in that, of course, things like Trump and Brexit and so on are motivated by xenophobia and racism and gender politics and sexism, 100%. But I actually think, especially in the certain type of the mainstream centrist and center-left discourse, we've gotten to the overcorrection point where people are legitimately forgetting that there is not only just rage or misdirected populist anger. I mean, some of that is even too cerebral. There are a lot of people that are absolutely checked out of this stuff because it's disgusting and because it's corrupt and because it's totally failed them. And maybe they vote, maybe they don't, maybe they do. They are totally alienated. And they're alienated because of things like a United Nations report that's in the United Kingdom. That level of wealth generated in that country, even just historically, let's be honest, as a global plunderer of wealth, for God's sake. 14 million people? And that's tens of millions of people in the United States. I mean, conservatively, 50 million people. 30 million people probably at the destitute level, and over 50% of the population, including people who might you could pretend are quote unquote middle class, who can't get a couple $100s together in case of any sort of emergency. That is, and by the way, of course, those things cut disproportionately on race lines. Absolutely. But they hit everybody. And if you don't think the context of that rage is behind why people aren't just ready to be like, oh, well, I should have voted against Brexit. I should vote for Hillary Clinton. Yeah, you're right. They've been totally decimated and punished. And you think that Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg are going to do anything about that? Get real.
Yeah, it's not... we're not ever talking about only the folks who voted for Trump or the folks who voted for Brexit, right? We're talking about all the people who didn't come out to vote against those things because the alternative didn't have anything to offer them. So it's the job of leftist politicians like Jeremy Corbyn now to convince people that, you know, even though labor hasn't done shit for them for decades, his program is different.
And it's also, and you can see another part of that Lula video I will reference. He said when he came into office, one of the first things he did is he took members and he said, he's like, look, I didn't run a socialist government. I wasn't in a position to do that. Sorry, right? Like, he just honest and knows how to understands power. But he took the most elite members of his cabinet. He took a banker and he took a doctor, and he was like, the first thing we're doing is we're flying to some of the most remote, impoverished parts of Brazil. And he's like, and he said, and I showed them, he's like, these people live in a room and they take a shit where they eat, and they make, like, this is how they're living. And if you're going to be part of this, we're going to negotiate, blah, blah, blah. But the center of this mandate is dealing with their problems, period. And that's something at the gut, at the core, that people respond to and they understand and they see. And you need that. And I think, frankly, Jeremy Corbyn is of that, you know, in a very different way, with very different background, obviously. But I think he just gets it. It shouldn't be that complicated. It's the kid following another kid to eat the apple core. That's disgusting. That's wrong. It's profoundly preventable. So prevent it. Let's have some fun. What is this, Matt?
Well, you know, people are really concerned about deep fakes.
What are deep fakes?
Sort of computer-generated photoshops of real life.
It's like where they can put your face on a porn star or whatever.
Or like Steve Buscemi, for instance, as I forget who they photoshopped him on top of a female
Ron Jeremy.
actress at an awards show, and it just looked like Steve Buscemi's face on it. So
I see. Okay. Well, but we're taking this fear and we're putting it in a fun direction.
Well, it might be fun. I don't know.
Or terrifying.
We have some footage of Ben Shapiro. Basically, so I think this is Snapchat, right? Does anybody use this app? I used to use Snapchat
think I'm too
years
old
ago.
to understand it.
Yeah.
It's so intuitive that I can't figure it out.
But they have this filter where you can make people appear as a baby, sort of live. And still on Twitter put it over the Ben Shapiro clip.
And I asked you a question, you failed to answer a single one of mine. Frankly, I find this whole thing a waste of time. If you want to read the book and critique the book, why don't you read and critique the book? If you want to read,
Oh, come on. God damn it.
Shit.
Fuck. Wow. Look at Matt having his own Seder on.
I just don't know why Twitter this stuff.
No, it's very annoying. The whole point of the art.
Do it live.
critique me, you can think whatever you want of me.
Why don't you just
Frankly,
try and
I don't
answer
care.
the
I don't
questions?
frankly give a damn what you think of me since I've never heard of you.
I do think if you tried to run that filter over Andrew Neil's face, it would probably break your phone.
Right.
Ben Shapiro looks the same.
No, he looks a little more adorable. Oh my God, Dave Rubin looks horrifying.
So now we have Dave Rubin and Joe Rogan. This
Oh,
is done by, I think, a listener of the show at Showtime 8D7.
Okay. Check it out.
You'll be all right. You'd still get mail. Amazon would pick Amazon would pick that up through UPS. It would cost a lot more. It wouldn't though. Competition would start kicking in, and between UPS and FedEx and Amazon and drones and blah blah
blah.
Aww.
And
One more
blah blah
time.
blah. Because
You'll be all right.
if he
You'd
was
still
like,
get mail. Amazon would pick it wouldn't. Amazon would pick that up through UPS. It would cost a lot more. It wouldn't though. Competition would start kicking in, and between UPS and FedEx and Amazon and drones and
blah blah blah.
There's always something like slightly like off about that argument between Rogan and Rubin, but now that it's two babies talking about it makes a lot more sense.
Now I get it.
It's so much easier to deal with them as babies.
Yeah, it's like
that is like the way that they
it's
think.
cute.
They're just babies.
IDW babies. It's like Muppet babies, but
It's like I think the Sam Harris is like scowling mean baby. This is something we need to take really seriously. Do definitely do Sam Harris.
yeah. Anybody tweet at me at Matt Leck on Twitter if you do any of these yourself. I'd love to see them.
Indeed. We want to see the work.
The IDW babies.
IDW babies. You're calling from a 210 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? 210. Are you there?
Hello, this is Cody.
Hey Cody,
From
what's
San Antonio.
Hey Cody, what's on your mind? Calling from San Antonio?
Yes, sir. San Antonio here.
What's on your mind?
Hi. I was on the job. You kind of caught me in a second. Let me see. I was going to say real quick, I appreciated when you said the other day in the Mexico interview, you talked about El Salvador real quick.
Mm-hmm.
I love that, everything they did there. They kind of decriminalized gangs, made them to where, they could get set up as legal protections like 501c3s.
Yep.
We'll kind of have here in America.
Mm-hmm.
I love that that they're doing efforts like that in other countries compared to here, where I kind of rolled into, I hope you're going to talk about the Meek Mill thing, but it kind of related to Nipsey Hussle, where, he got shot out there outside the store, and I believe there was a gentleman talking to him who had just got out of jail after like 6 years in. And
it was a gentleman that he was actually friends with, that he was driving around for the day to like get a new wardrobe and helping him get reset up in life. Yeah. That's what Nipsey Hussle was doing.
Absolutely.
He was murdered.
And, when he got shot, he got put in a wheelchair and all that. And then afterwards they caught him on a probation violation because, Nipsey Hussle, despite being, an exalted member of the community and about to meet with the police chief the next day, was still, on basically a government list as a gang member, a known gang member.
Mm-hmm.
So the other guy who's on probation, is caught on a technicality with a known gang member. They throw him in jail.
Right.
They tried to sweep it under the rug and release him, I think, kind of quickly.
Yep.
But I was just going to say, it's a big, that's anytime we want to talk about, there's not systemic racism or whatever. It doesn't even have to be racism. This is just systemic. Somebody's name is on the list and somebody else gets punished with it.
Any thoughts on Pete Buttigieg? I'm sorry.
I'm all right, dude. I won't get into that.
I'm sorry.
I'll do politics another time.
No. This is really this is really important, and I'm planning.
Anyway,
I'm planning on TMBS to do an illicit history of the El Salvador program. It's really important, and it was undermined by the U.S. But and it relates also to what happened in the '80s there. So I'm in preparation for that for TMBS patrons. Thanks so much for the call.
Awesome,
man. Appreciate it.
man.
And this is politics.
It's
like that goes without saying.
Absolutely.
Definitely more important politics than Pete Buttigieg.
More important everything. Is that the Pete Buttigieg exhaustion sound?
Harumph.
Yes.
Harumph. You're calling from a 512 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Is me?
Yep, it's you. What's up?
This is Josh from Austin.
Hey, Josh. What's going on? What's on your mind?
I wanted to bring up a few points. For one, there's this clown world video, if you've heard about that, from Bosch.
No, I don't even know anything you just said. No.
Okay. It talks about the whole clown world thing and Nazi dog whistling and stuff. It's a mirror right now because the original one got taken down.
Okay.
And
is there a way, is there something that's a little more general that you could talk about? Because it sounds interesting, but I just have no idea what any of that is.
How could I break this down? Basically, you'd have to watch the video itself.
Okay, is there something non-video related you want to talk about? Or if you want to plug this video, you could plug it.
Well, the whole culture, they've basically taken Pepe and put like a clown wig on it, and they're doing like dog whistles, like Hong Kong is Heil Hitler, for example. Like that's the kind of things that the video talks about.
Okay, why don't you say what the name of the video is and people could find it if they're interested? What is it?
Yeah, it's called Vosh Clown World, VAUSH. It's about an hour long. It's a really good breakdown of all these themes that are going on.
Okay, so it's a critique and kind of like a user's manual to like the new sort of Nazi propaganda stuff. Alt-right propaganda
yeah, it's getting real prevalent. Where they're trying to put it out there, it's getting real big on YouTube and social media and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's another one I wanted to bring up just in general. It's a comedy video called How to Be a YouTube Skeptic Anti-SJW.
Mm-hmm.
And that one's just for fun and kind of breaks down in 5 minutes, satirically, what the video itself is talking about.
Who did the video?
Oh, well,
Who did the video? Just so
this one's it's called Scrubble Boy is the YouTuber.
Scrubble
and
Boy.
It's just a real quick one. I think you'd get a kick out of it, honestly. That's pretty much all I wanted to bring up was just
Thanks
those
for the
two
call.
for today.
Appreciate it. Those both sound
no
interesting.
problem. I'll try to call him.
Thanks, man. Scrubble Boy and Bosch.
I think Vosh.
Vosh. Oh, I misunderstood. All right. Let's do some fun sound. So, we're talking about how to reorient a global leftward project from strikes and social movements to electoral strategy, pulling voices from activists, from political prisoners to opposition leaders. And, at the very least, one of Donald Trump's very stupid sons is very scared. Because what he sees in the Democratic Party is not an epic struggle between a venerable, aging socialist who still is 100% all there versus as an example, of unbelievably mediocre gentrifying mayor of South Bend, or an old guy that doesn't seem like he's aging as well with absolutely horrifying policy record. That's not what Don Jr. sees. What Don Jr. sees something in the Democratic Party that is way more insidious than that. Check this out on Fox and Friends.
She goes on to say, I pray for the president, and the president tweeted, he said, thanks.
Talking about Pelosi.
She goes on to say, I pray for the president, and the president tweeted, he said, thanks. I know you truly mean it.
Well, listen, I don't think the party of infanticide is exactly praying for anyone. That's not what they do. We get that. It's just a consummate attack on American values, on democracy. Honestly, this election, 2020, it's about communism versus freedom. You can choose. That's the great thing about our system. But that's what it is. They want to attack anything that has to do with free markets, anything that has to do with freedom. They need government control because that's all they are.
Communism, right? Or socialism?
Honestly, at this point, it feels like it's going beyond, right? It's just the stepping stones. We've seen this system fail time and time again. No different than Joe Biden saying government's failed you. Meanwhile, he's been doing it for 50 years. Right. It's like socialism's going to work this time. Done. It's failed 1,000 times. It's killed hundreds of millions of people. But this time it's going to work. It's nonsense.
Wow. It's amazing how they have none of their dad's like weird charisma. They just suck. It's amazing. They have nothing. And he doesn't. Is it me, or does it seem like he's about to like tear up or something?
This entire interview,
so
he is
weird.
Freaked out, man.
I will say, I was surprised when Kamala Harris published her tract on communization theory and anarchism.
You just plagiarizing her dad.
Yeah.
She went beyond. It's beyond communism, Matt.
It's called the Lavender Book.
I love the idea that like he's been doing government for 50 years and he still wants to do it. Therefore, Joe Biden is a communist.
Yeah, Joe, that's exactly it.
Communism is when the government does things. We all know this.
Man, I wish that I had the Joe Biden impression ready for that.
The
It's
more
like, and
things
that's
it
why
does.
I'm a communist, folks. And guess what? You know the way you solve that? Communism.
Bless me, Karl Marx.
Yeah. Oh, bless me. I'm a Maoist. That if Joe Biden is just like, what it was all of a sudden him becoming a communist, that would be awesome. That would make him a very tempting vote.
It goes beyond communism and socialism, and yet this is just a stepping stone to that beyond. It just makes
also,
no sense.
Yeah, it's
maybe he's listening to maybe he's checking out the dolphin shit.
It goes beyond.
Maybe he's listening to the Antifada.
The beautiful thing about our system is you can choose liberty or communism in every election.
That's what this election comes down to. The other side wants freedom. We want to take care of the modern day version of coal.
Like Ducey, like communism or socialism. Like what's going through Ducey's mind when he asks that question? It's like is he thinking you're an idiot?
I think Ducey's just like, got the morning talking points. And there was a minute several years ago where I was anxious when Roger finally had to leave that I wasn't going to know what to say, but apparently things are still just rocking and rolling.
That's all they got.
Yeah.
And, like, they think that they're going to damage Bernie Sanders by associating him with socialism, but I think they're really doing the opposite. Like, the more that these kinds of popular programs that Bernie's pulling for, like universal health care, tuition-free college, et cetera, are associated with socialism, the more people are going to like socialism.
Agree. And also, I will say this. I don't think that this is necessarily going to pull well. I get that Fox Business is targeting like a sort of upper middle class, falsely identifying with oligarchs audience. And, like grouchy cigar chompers and a handful of like weird students. But I think for most people, including people who might rate themselves as being pretty conservative, I don't think that they're going to share Stuart Varney's opinion. Stuart Varney. I don't exactly think that they're going to view ultra wealthy people and major multinational corporations cheating on their taxes in the same way he does.
Jackie DeAngelis joins us with a history lesson. Okay, Jackie, you're going to talk to us about when capitalism goes wrong. Give me an example of capitalism.
There are a couple of examples that people will point out, and that is what I'm doing here today, right? So let's talk about big tech. Facebook, Amazon, Google, right? Facebook, a lot of people saying too much power. They're a disruptor, but they need to be regulated. There are privacy issues. What about Google being sued for anti-competitive practices? Or Amazon, a lot of people will turn around and say they don't pay their fair share of taxes on billions of dollars in revenue, federal taxes I'm talking about.
Can I interrupt? Do you mind if I do that?
Please do. It's your show.
I'm being very, very rude. I know that. I don't think that's an example of capitalism going wrong. I think it's a fine example of capitalism being innovative, dynamic, and a remarkable employer and creator of wealth.
You know what? I think you're right. And I think saying capitalism has gone wrong may be a little bit too strong, but there are certainly places, I think, where the system could be improved, right? Even the president,
Wow. I just will say, like, first of all, I mean, okay. I mean, just the just total cuckish devotion to these companies. Like, well, they hand out some jobs, so they should be able to completely plunder all of our resources, destroy the earth, and work people to death. I mean, I guess it works if you're, this like hilarious paid propagandist like Stuart Varney. But the other element I will say, and I don't want to overestimate the importance of things like this, but the fact that there is a capitalism gone wrong segment on Fox Business that isn't purely adversarial, that is definitely a signal that's a signal from the intellectual infrastructure of the debate. That's Richard Wolff going on there and dropping some science.
They had on Richard Wolff and Bianca Cunningham, the co-chair of NYCDSA, on Fox News. MSNBC would never have those people on.
That's true.
This is American Enterprise Institute chart, I believe. But it points out that actually startups were in a historically speaking, there's not a whole lot of new startups being formed. It's mainly because actually the data is from the Kauffman Foundation, which is good. But yeah, like we do not have a dynamic time for like startup as an innovation because everything is owned by the same few companies. If you're a tech person, basically your business model is to, as Corey Pine puts it in the Live, Work, Work, Die, you're basically aiming to get your product or patent bought by one of the big four companies.
You need to have the social capital. That's why he said the number one thing towards succeeding in Silicon Valley is going to Stanford. And you could even drop out. You just need that social network. Is access to venture capital, which already is a huge barrier that eliminates most people. And then the sole goal of your startup is to sell it to one of the big four monopoly companies. So, yeah, of course, that's delusional.
I did just read about a very innovative sounding startup that basically invented payday loans for downwardly mobile millennials.
Well, that sounds like a brilliant idea. That sounds like the market's solving problems, and I'm so tired of, millennials complaining.
What could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go right is that millennials might be able to get a start on their lives instead of sitting around and complaining all the time and eating avocado toast. Let's do the Steve Thrasher sound. That's number 10.
Oh, I know that guy.
So Stephen Thrasher, he writes for The Guardian.
Yeah, and back in the day, we both used to write for the New York Post. Not New York Post, New York Press, RIP.
I was about to say, I was fascinated to find your hidden New York Post history.
That would be something.
I think I actually interviewed him.
Oh, and the Village Voice.
Stephen Thrasher was giving a graduate commencement speech at New York University. BDS is the tool that civil society has to resist the Israeli occupation, to resist the siege on Gaza. This requires nothing, there's nothing complicated about this. You can loathe Hamas, as actually, in fact, I do in many respects. You can condemn any action that targets civilians from any political faction, as I think we should. You can, question Abu Mazen. And in fact, how complacent the West Bank political leadership has been in acquiescing to U.S. and Israeli demands. But what you cannot do, no matter what your background or where you're coming from is deny that this is an occupation, and deny that it's an apartheid, and deny that there is a system in place where, as an example, in the West Bank, there's roads for Jewish people and roads for Palestinians. Does that remind you of a certain part of American history? It should be no surprise to anybody that in the 1980s, the Israeli government and the apartheid government of South Africa developed such close relations that Israel was actually helping the then South African government develop a secret nuclear weapons program, which was shut down when the ANC took power. So this is Stephen Thrasher, still in the context of today's world, taking a brave stance on behalf of all humanity, in this case the Palestinians, by speaking in support of boycott, divestment, sanctions at NYU.
And I am so proud of NYU's chapters of Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voices for Peace, and of GSOC, and of the NYU student government, and of my colleagues in the Department of Social and Cultural Analysis for supporting the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against the apartheid state government in Israel. Because this is what we are called to do. This is our NYU legacy, that we are connected in radical love, and we have a duty and a privilege in this position to protect not the most popular amongst us, but the most vulnerable amongst us on every campus where we serve, in every community where we live, in every place that we work. This is our duty.
Good for him. Well done. Ben Shapiro's doctor's wife, Glenn Greenwald, has an awesome interview with Lula on the Intercept podcast. Oh, yeah, of course. Everybody must watch that. We covered that before. Hey, Michael, did you see Professor Wolf go on Fox Business Capitalism versus Socialism Town Hall? I didn't. I've heard it was very good.
It was pretty good. Yeah, there was no real gotcha moment, but I think it definitely, hopefully, got some people to think about things in a slightly new way.
And I would just subscribe to Economic Update, subscribe to Richard Wolf's YouTube channel. He's awesome. He's a gem.
Join the DSA.
Join the DSA. Human Brain. Bluetooth headsets are too cheap now. Got a set for $20 and no need to worry about dongles or losing sound in one earbud as the wires fritz out over time. Attorney General, want to remind everybody that these centrists are not on Hillary's level of spewing counterintuitive nonsense persuasively. She would have nailed Biden's what happened to making employers pay for insurance lines. She would have crushed Booker's Bernie can work. I don't even want to repeat that one. Yeah, I don't know, but I also don't really. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm not going to retroactively pretend that
they're
Hillary
all
Clinton. Well, and they're all well. As a performer, again, I think we need to be real about our opposition, and we should. And Biden will see, but as a political performer, Joe Biden is better than Hillary Clinton. Kamala Harris is better than Hillary Clinton. So let's, be real about what we're up against here. Kentucky Fried Comrade recorded a joint episode with Ghetto News Network yesterday morning about how socialism is a lot simpler than we make it. Most of our work really did boil down to talking to people who care about their jobs. I agree with that. Brother from Brooklyn heard Shapiro talking about homelessness crisis in Dem cities on his show. What are progressive policies that you think would curtail homelessness? Universal public housing and rent control would be my top two. Leftist European. The EU election has officially started today. Most countries vote on Sunday, but the UK votes today. I voted absentee for the confederal group of European United Left, Nordic, and Green Left. The EU election. Okay. I don't know. Did you vote? I would assume that includes the Labor candidate, but I'm not sure. Colin from CT, please clip the first call. What was the first call? PD Poindexter. Several months ago, I heard Seymour Hersh interviewed. It was wide-ranging, but one thing he said that he believed, actually, he stated this as a fact, is that Mueller had Trump's taxes and there was nothing there. It seems crazy given how hard the Republicans are fighting the exposure of his taxes. What are your thoughts? Could all the delay taxes be well-organized gaslighting effort, knowing that the taxes will come out? I mean, I think they would fight it regardless. I think that those taxes will show what we already know. There was a New York Times report. I mean, but maybe in the sense of, do his taxes conceal some hidden, is there going to be a wire transfer in his taxes from a bank in, the Kremlin? No. I mean, but I didn't watch the interview. I think in some ways the Republicans just fight transparency on principle.
And that was
and I think all executives do that.
Let's talk about Cy Hirsch.
Yes.
Cy Hirsch talks a lot.
Cy Hirsch also, in addition
I
to
like
being
Cy
a
Hirsch,
legend,
but he talks
does,
a lot.
Right, that's also true. Brock from VA, already an MR member. Love your news aggregation and comedy. Can you guys go around the room and name one or two of your favorite outlets that would be a good buyer subscription to help support good journalism? Well, dude, you didn't include
Literary Hangovers, or patreon.com/literary hangover.
Patreon.com/TMBS.
Patreon.com/the Antifada.
I mean, just don't do the New York Times.
Don't do the New York Times.
Local is
Don't do
good.
Washington Post. Local is good.
Subscribe to some quarterlies or something, just small independent magazines. Those are pretty good.
And you know
Jacobin. Become a member. Subscribe to Jacobin.
I'm going to throw out a plug for Means TV. What they're building is very ambitious, and they're planning to do some actual journalism in addition to entertainment.
Cool.
And it's all leftists. By leftists, for leftists.
By leftists, for leftists. All
Or-
right.
And the left curious, of course.
You're calling from an 818 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Michael. Long time no see. How you guys
Dave
been up
from
to?
Jamaica. I'm so used to talking with you on the TMBS post game. How are you? What's on your mind?
I'm good. I'm glad that it's hard to get in nowadays. That means you're reaching more people. So more people try to contact. It's a good thing.
Good to talk to you, but what's on your, what are you thinking?
On my mind, with the YouTube stuff you were talking about earlier,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's just me, but I think I'm seeing a slight decline when it comes to right-wing YouTubers, in the sense that they're boring. They keep talking about the same shit.
Yep. Totally.
While as you list out the left YouTubers, they're gaining more traction. So
right.
I think we might be on that horizon. So that's a little bit of good news.
Yep.
I want to ask all of you that are there, when we're talking about failing to the top, there's tons of loathsome political figures out there. So where you think like people like Trump would be if they were poor and they had basically the same personality?
Trump would be if Donald Trump was poor, he would be in jail. Well, 100%.
If Donald Trump was a Donald Trump, he would be in jail.
Yeah, I mean if Donald Trump was upper middle class, he'd be in jail.
If he was one of his friends.
The first sexual assault that he committed, he would definitely have gone to jail for.
Or just even like yes,
I mean,
but
all
I
of
mean,
his friends are in jail.
Passing a bad check. I mean, this guy could literally. I mean, yes. I don't know where Narendra. Maybe Narendra Modi might be like passing out cult literature or something. I don't know. And Bolsonaro would be probably, well, hopefully under investigation for something he did in the military. Thanks for the call, Dave. Appreciate it. Final call of the day. You're calling from a 419 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hello, I'm Quinn Albury. I'm from Toledo, Ohio. And for a while, I've been thinking about starting a public access radio show. And that really solidified when Sam went on Chapo and talked a lot about his experience with Air America.
Cool.
Obviously, whatever I do is going to be a lot smaller and more limited in scale than that. But I was just you've got a sort of a history in broadcast with TMBS and the Majority Report. And I was wondering what tips or advice you would have for starting something like that.
Well, you're doing community radio, so actually I have I've gone on terrestrial radio, but I don't have any talk radio background.
Yeah,
but I mean,
Sam would be a better person.
Yeah, call in when Sam's on, but also just come up with a clear concept of what you want to talk about. I think the generic advice that Matt always says, which I agree with, is that particularly something like that is, if you focus on your locality in a way. I think there's a lot of people that like to understand what's happening in a place like Ohio from a left on the ground perspective. I think that would be really effective. Thanks for the call,
in
man.
fact, in Ohio, they have Street Fight Radio.
And they
I
do
don't know
that
if
on
you're
a community-
familiar
they do that on a
with
community
that show,
station, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's really, really good. Two chill anarchist dads talking about the things that are wrong with the world, and they have people call in and talk about their jobs, and it's really fascinating to listen to, and I think helps build some sort of class consciousness and solidarity. So that's like one really cool thing about this show too, is we get to hear from people.
Street fights, yeah, I would check out. Yeah, I would reach out to the Street Fight Radio guys. That's a good idea because they're right there
in Columbus.
Yeah, exploit existing networks, folks.
That's what you got to do. Suede Artha. Do you guys think it's fair to say that neoliberal ideology infiltrated our entire government during the 80s and 90s? Yes. Seb Gorka's business card this weekend. This weekend, I overheard a coworker talking about how he was okay doing work off the clock if asked to. What's the best way to explain to him that's a horrible mindset to have? I honestly would not even begin to understand how to approach dealing with something like that.
Yeah, what kind of work is it?
That's wild.
Tell him to stop being such a wage cuck.
I don't think that is going to resonate with somebody that would have a position like that to begin with. No.
He's working for Seb Gorka? Wait.
No. Yes,
I think that was a joke.
No, that was his name. Did Kamala Harris actually have anybody arrested for the truancy thing? Yes, there was a report in the Huffington Post. Read about it. It was a woman with a medical condition, in fact. Pajama Boy. Hey, gang, so I did a listen to TMBS from 2 nights ago, and Michael did a nice rundown on the problematic issues with Warren. I appreciated it because I didn't know a lot of these things, but I take issue with some of the policy wonk argument. I don't see enough policy plans from Bernie. I'd like to know more about his plans to implement what he wants, and am I just not seeing it? Well, I would just say, first of all, yes, you're not seeing it because he is putting, I mean, as an example, the education plan he just put out with a complete ban on private charter schools, he adopted and built, and a minimum salary of $65,000 a year for teachers was actually a policy plan formulated by teachers and with huge influence by the NAACP. That's exceptional in terms of grassroots connection. But the argument that I was making on the show, and I will continue to make, is that there's fetishization with wonkery and policy is another symbolic signifier that is important to a certain part of the media class. So putting out great policy is great. It's also, without power and without strategy, also makes no difference. A lot of really smart, well-intentioned people can sit in rooms and write a lot of really nice ideas, and those things will not be achieved because they go up against incumbent interests in this country. And a way that Bernie Sanders has always clearly stood out to me, and I think hopefully I do a good job of articulating this, but I would really recommend people read all of Megan Day's pieces in The Jacobin, is that Bernie Sanders absolutely understands that the only way of even having a prayer of passing even a more modest agenda to get out of the predicament we're in is to have a absolutely activated and very serious polity. And that's why, unlike any other candidate, as an example, he uses his email list to tell people to go to protests. He uses his email list to tell people about strikes. He uses his email list to get money to grassroots abortion organizations. And also at all of his rallies, there's always, in addition to politicians and well-known surrogates and so on, there's always local activists. If you went to the Chicago rally, I watched it on YouTube, there's local young anti-gentrification activists. He's highlighting and centering that in a way that not only is distinct as a candidate, but just blows past, frankly, policy stuff is great and policy stuff is important, but policy flows from power. You can't reverse engineer it. So I want to hear what somebody's plan and strategy is for how they actually hope to contextually achieve these things. And when Warren says the things she says about Medicare for all, that concerns me because that is indicative actually of a mindset of inside negotiation, which of course is part of the process, but is going to be secondary to having a totally activated politics, which is the only prayer of even a Warren agenda getting passed. So that's my position on that. What is this?
Well, with regards to that, I agree generally. I'm not super interested in policy. I love that Warren's doing.
Yeah, no, it's great, but it's becoming fetishized.
Well, I like the ante being raised more than I like the actual I care about the actual policies being nuts and bolts of policies. But Rebecca Lieber has this thing in Mother Jones that points out that forget how many trillions of dollars presidential candidates have in their climate plans. Which will be in the hands of Congress anyway. Let's hear about their plans for the powerful executive branch. And I like that like Julian Brave Noisecat points out that you can ban drilling on public lands. There's a whole lot you can do. Like, let's hear about those plans. You can get more specific about how we're actually going to use the executive branch to do it. I think if you want to be one of those people who are waiting for more specifics in policy, then that's the area more than bills that are not, we don't even know what the makeup of Congress is going to be like anyway.
I'm sorry, you're not. It's the same way, and it's better, but the part of the fixation on Buttigieg is people who identify with, oh my God, he went to Harvard, he speaks Norwegian, and there is this similar plans. I'm sorry, none of us are going to be involved in those plans. We are going to be involved in politics. How you harness politics is a much more messy on-the-ground experience and reality. And every single rally, Bernie basically says, I'm going to try to take back all the shit that's been stolen from you and redistribute it. And if you want that to happen, you better damn well help me make that happen. And again, if you don't think that Bernie isn't going to have a serious policy shop and isn't really committed to the specifics of getting the best policy for these things right, first of all, I don't buy it, period, just based off a record. And secondly, Warren's been putting out great ideas. Bernie has also been in Congress, literally passing the first use of Congress trying to override the president on a foreign policy since the 70s with Yemen. I mean, the guy is legislating. So I just don't buy it.
Well, it speaks to a historical myopia about how change actually happens, right. I think. I mean, you want to look at how we got the New Deal. We had... Never mind like a grassroots electoral organization like Justice Democrats. Like there were communists and anarchists on the ground everywhere, going on strike, radical trade unionists, just agitating for radical change. And then we got some form of social democracy. So it's going to take a lot to get a similar kind of program passed. But like Bernie is the one who understands that out of all of them.
100%, without a doubt. All right, the final IM of the day goes to Ambonara. I don't know why the BBC seems to be favoring Nigel Farage type takeover with the UK basically pursuing a Trumpist collapse, but they do. I can't imagine how they think this would work out well for them. Well, you look to Brazil. And the United States, for that matter, about how delusional people in those positions can be. We're back here tomorrow with Mehdi Hassan. Thanks, everybody.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive,